Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Marcus Rodriguez's eyes snapped open in the suffocating darkness, his consciousness torn from sleep by a burning sensation, unlike anything he'd experienced since that warehouse fire in Denver. Something was terribly wrong. The sheets beneath him felt sticky with moisture. Reaching down with trembling fingers, he touched his left ankle and felt an unnatural warmth in the pale green glow emanating from his bedside alarm clock. His fingertips came away glistening with an eerie, phosphorescent liquid. "What the hell?" he whispered, throwing back the covers. The bandage he'd applied the night before was soaked through completely. As he peeled it back, a putrid smell hit him like sulfur mixed with rotting fish. The small scrape he'd gotten at the new AquaZone water park 3 weeks ago had transformed into something nightmarish. A crater of angry, blackened flesh that pulsed with an otherworldly blue-green light. The bedroom door creaked open. "Dad, are you okay?" Ethan stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, eyes wide with concern. Marcus lunged for the covers, hiding the horror. "I'm fine, buddy," he lied. "Just had a bad dream." But as his 8-year-old son padded back to bed, Marcus knew this nightmare was just beginning. Marcus Rodriguez hadn't always been the quiet, cautious figure that the residents of Millbrook, Montana had come to know. Before settling in this mountain town of 15,000 souls, he'd served 12 years as a firefighter in Denver, earning commendations that now gathered dust in a drawer he rarely opened. The discipline of his former profession still governed his life. In the methodical way he maintained his log cabin home, in his punctuality at peak fitness, where he worked as a personal trainer, and most importantly, in how he raised his son. Ethan was 8 now, with his mother's gentle spirit and Marcus's stubborn determination. The boy's bedroom walls were covered with posters of marine life and crayon drawings of the 3 of them, Marcus, Ethan, and Isabella, standing together beside the crystal-clear Lake Millbrook. Even though Isabella had been gone for 3 years, cancer having taken her swiftly and cruelly, leaving Marcus to navigate fatherhood alone in this town they'd chosen for its clean air and safe community. "You've got to be the strong one now," Marcus often reminded himself, Isabella's final words echoing in his mind during moments of doubt. He took that responsibility seriously, perhaps too seriously, viewing any personal weakness as a failure to honor her memory. Millbrook itself was unremarkable except for the imposing presence of Apex Industries on the southern edge of town. The chemical manufacturing company employed nearly half the adult population, including most of the city council. When Apex had donated $5 million to build the state-of-the-art AquaZone water park last spring, complete with Olympic-sized pools, water slides, and a lazy river, the town had celebrated with a festival that lasted 3 days. Every weekend since the park opened, Marcus took Ethan swimming, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. The boy was still working up the courage to try the tallest water slide, and Marcus never pushed him. "You'll know when you're ready, buddy," he'd say, remembering how Isabella had always given Ethan space to find his courage in his own time. What Marcus couldn't know was that these weekend visits, these precious moments with his son, had planted something sinister inside him. Something that would soon threaten everything he'd fought to build since Isabella's death. Something that would test not just his physical strength, but the very promise he'd made to his dying wife. The 4th of July weekend arrived with the kind of Montana heat that shimmered above the asphalt and drove the entire town of Millbrook to seek refuge at Aquazone. Marcus had promised Ethan they'd be first in line when the gates opened at 9 in the morning, and true to his word, they arrived 20 minutes early, the boy bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Think I can try the Thunder Rapids slide today, Dad?" Ethan asked, his Batman backpack slung over one narrow shoulder. Marcus tousled his son's dark hair. "Maybe, but remember, I'll know when I'm ready," Ethan finished, rolling his eyes good-naturedly. "I know, Dad." The Aquazone's gleaming entrance reflected their image. The tall, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair and the small boy who looked like a miniature version of him, except for the eyes. Ethan had Isabella's eyes, a fact that sometimes caught Marcus off guard when his son looked up at him a certain way. As the gates opened, Marcus noticed Robert Kim, the head lifeguard and security supervisor, looking unusually tense as he checked water quality readings on his tablet. The man's perpetually calm demeanor had shifted since his wife's passing last winter cancer, like Isabella. It seemed to Marcus that cancer had carved its way through Millbrook with particular vengeance. "Morning, Robert," Marcus called. The man nodded distractedly, frowning at something on his screen. "Morning, Marcus." "Chemical levels are running a bit high today," Robert mumbled. "New safety protocols from corporate." He didn't meet Marcus's eyes. The pool area was spectacular, as always, azure water sparkling under the Montana sky, water slides twisting through artificial rock formations. But something about the chemical smell seemed off to Marcus. Sharper, with an undercurrent of something metallic that reminded him of electrical fires. 12 years fighting blazes had honed his senses to danger, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was Millbrook, not a burning building. Ethan was already stripping down to his swim trunks, eager to claim their usual spot by the wave pool. Marcus changed more slowly, his eyes sweeping the facility out of habit. Nothing seemed amiss beyond the unusual odor, which no one else appeared to notice. "Dad, come on," Ethan called, already waist-deep in the water. The morning passed pleasantly. Ethan practiced his backstroke while Marcus timed him, pride swelling in his chest at his son's determination. Around noon, the park grew crowded as more families arrived, and Marcus suggested they take a break for lunch. 5 more minutes, Ethan pleaded, and Marcus couldn't say no to those eyes. 5 minutes, he agreed, settling on the textured concrete beside the pool with his feet dangling in the water. Didn't notice the jagged edge of a loose tile until it scraped against his ankle, leaving a cut maybe 3/4 of an inch long. It stung briefly as the chlorinated water hit it, but Marcus dismissed it entirely. After burns from chemical fires and smoke inhalation injuries, a tiny scrape barely registered. "Time's up, buddy," Marcus called after exactly 5 minutes. "Let's get some lunch." Later, as they drove home with Ethan dozing in the back seat, Marcus absently rubbed at his ankle. It itched slightly, nothing more. He'd forgotten about it entirely by dinner time. 4 days later, the itch had transformed into a persistent burning sensation. Marcus examined the cut in his bathroom mirror and frowned at the inflamed edges, which seemed to have a faint, almost imperceptible glow in the dim light. He cleaned it with hydrogen peroxide, applied antibiotic ointment, and covered it with a bandage. Probably just taking longer to heal because of its location, he reasoned. No need to make a fuss. By the following weekend, walking had become uncomfortable. The cut hadn't closed. Instead, it seemed to be widening, the edges turning an angry purple-black. Most disturbing was the way it seemed to pulse with that strange, dim light in complete darkness. Marcus canceled their swimming plans, claiming a scheduling conflict at work, unwilling to let Ethan see him limping. "But it's our special time," Ethan protested, lower lip trembling dangerously. "I know, buddy. We'll go next week, I promise." The lie tasted bitter on Marcus's tongue. Alone in his bathroom that night, Marcus removed the bandage and had to stifle a curse. The wound now measured nearly 2 inches across, with yellowish discharge crusting at the edges. The surrounding skin felt hot to the touch, and in the complete darkness, it glowed with an eerie blue-green phosphorescence that made his stomach turn. Infection, he thought grimly. He doubled up on the antibiotic ointment and popped a couple of over-the-counter pain relievers. 3 more weeks passed in this manner, Marcus hiding his increasingly painful condition from Ethan, making excuses for his limping, avoiding their swimming ritual. The wound continued to worsen, developing a foul odor that no amount of cleaning seemed to eliminate. The edges had turned black, and the surrounding skin was beginning to slough off in small pieces. Worst of all, the glow had intensified, visible even in normal room lighting. "Dad, why are you walking funny?" Ethan finally asked one morning as Marcus made breakfast, unable to fully disguise his uneven gait. "Just a little foot pain, buddy. Nothing serious." Ethan's eyes, Isabella's eyes, narrowed with suspicion. "Is it like when Mom said her back hurt a little before the doctors found the bad cells?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella had indeed downplayed her initial symptoms, not wanting to worry them. By the time they discovered the truth, the cancer had already spread too far. "No," Marcus said firmly, kneeling despite the shooting pain to look his son in the eye. "It's just a cut that got infected. I'm going to see Dr. Foster today, and she'll give me medicine to make it better." It was the first time he'd admitted out loud that he needed medical attention, and the decision came not from concern for himself, but from the fear in his son's eyes. Dr. Foster's examination room was sterile white, the paper crinkling beneath Marcus as he hesitantly removed his sock. The doctor's expression shifted from professional interest to deep concern as the wound came into view. "How long has it been like this, Marcus?" she asked gently, probing the edges with a gloved finger while trying to hide her shock at the phosphorescent glow. "Started as a small cut about 4 weeks ago. Got worse this past week, Doctor." Foster frowned, taking photographs with a specialized camera. "This is a very unusual infection. I'm going to prescribe a strong antibiotic and recommend you stay off it as much as possible." She paused, studying the wound more closely under different lights. "The tissue necrosis in this, luminescence, is extremely concerning. If this doesn't improve within 3 days, I want you back here immediately." Marcus nodded, relief washing over him. Antibiotics, a straightforward solution. He'd be back to normal soon, and Ethan could stop worrying. But 3 days later, the antibiotics had made no difference. If anything, the wound looked worse, deeper, with more blackened tissue and a stronger odor. The glow had intensified to the point where it was clearly visible even in daylight. When Marcus stepped out of bed that morning, his foot left a small smear of luminescent discharge on the hardwood floor. For the first time since his injury, a tendril of real fear curled through his stomach. He thought of Isabella, of the promise he'd made to keep their son safe, to be there for him. He thought of Ethan's question, "Is it like when Mom said her back hurt a little?" With shaking hands, Marcus reached for his phone and called Dr. Foster's office. "The antibiotics aren't working," he said when the doctor came on the line. "And I think there's something seriously wrong. The wound is glowing, doctor, actually glowing." Peak fitness fell silent when Marcus Rodriguez collapsed. One moment he was demonstrating proper form for a deadlift to Mrs. Patterson, a retired librarian trying to maintain her bone density. The next, his left leg simply gave way, sending him crashing to the rubber floor mat with a strangled cry that didn't sound like it could have come from the stoic ex-firefighter everyone knew. Marcus. Mrs. Patterson's concerned voice seemed to reach him from a great distance as black spots danced before his eyes. The pain had been building all morning, a deep, throbbing agony that radiated from his ankle up through his calf. But he'd pushed through it as he always did, until his body simply refused to obey any longer. "I'm fine," he managed, attempting to push himself up even as his vision tunneled. "Just lost my balance." Tommy Blake, Marcus's old firefighting buddy who now owned Peak Fitness, was at his side in an instant. One look at Marcus's ashen face and the sweat beading on his forehead told Tommy everything he needed to know. "Like hell you are," Tommy muttered, then louder. "Someone call an ambulance." "No ambulance," Marcus protested weakly. "Ethan, school pickup." "I'll get Ethan," Tommy assured him, his voice firm. "Right now, you need a hospital." The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, emergency room lights, and increasingly concerned medical professionals. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness as his temperature spiked to 104 degrees. Each time he surfaced, his first thought was of Ethan, who would pick him up, who would explain why his father wasn't there, who would make sure he didn't worry. He finally awoke fully. The harsh fluorescent lights of an inpatient room greeted him. An IV dripped steadily into his arm, and his left leg was elevated, wrapped in bandages from mid-calf to toes. The pain had subsided to a dull roar, tempered by whatever medication flowed through the IV. "Welcome back to the land of the living," came a crisp female voice. Marcus turned his head to find Dr. Foster watching him from the doorway, her expression more serious than he'd ever seen it. "My son," Marcus began, his voice raspy, "is with Tommy and his wife," Dr. Foster assured him, approaching the bed. "They've been keeping me updated on your condition. You gave everyone quite a scare, Marcus." "How bad is it?" Dr. Foster pulled up a chair and sat, a gesture that immediately set off warning bells in Marcus's mind. Doctors who sat down to deliver news rarely brought good tidings. "I'm going to be direct with you," she began. "What you have isn't a typical bacterial infection. We took you into surgery to clean the wound, and what we found was unprecedented." She paused, studying his face as if gauging how much he could handle. "Don't sugarcoat it," Marcus said flatly. "Very well. The infection in your ankle isn't caused by bacteria or any known pathogen. Your wound is contaminated with an unknown chemical compound that's causing aggressive tissue necrosis while simultaneously creating bioluminescent properties in the affected area." Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misheard. Bioluminescent. "The glow you've been seeing. It's your tissue reacting to a foreign chemical agent, most likely an industrial compound that shouldn't exist in nature." She opened a tablet and turned it toward him, showing microscopic images that made his stomach lurch. "We've removed significant amounts of contaminated tissue during surgery, along with traces of metallic particles and synthetic polymers that have no business being in a human body." The images on the screen looked like something from a science fiction movie, cellular structures that seemed to shimmer and pulse with unnatural light. "How did this get there?" Marcus managed. "That's what we're trying to determine. This type of contamination suggests exposure to experimental industrial chemicals. Marcus, can you recall exactly when and how you first injured your ankle?" Marcus described the small cut at Aquazone, the gradual worsening, his attempts at self-treatment. As he spoke, Dr. Foster's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Have you been back to the water park since then?" "No, I've been making excuses to Ethan about why we can't go, Doctor." Foster made notes on her tablet. We'll need to take samples from that facility immediately. If these chemicals are present in the water system, other people could be at risk. She met his eyes directly. I should warn you that your condition is serious. The chemical contamination has begun to affect the deeper tissues, approaching the bone. We've started you on experimental chelation therapy to remove the metallic compounds, but there's significant damage to address. What's the bottom line, doctor? Marcus asked, military directness taking over. Best case scenario. With aggressive treatment, several weeks of hospitalization followed by months of rehabilitation therapy. Worst case. She paused. If the contamination reaches the bone marrow or continues to spread despite treatment, we may need to consider partial amputation. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Marcus thought of Ethan, of teaching him to ride a bike, of their hikes in Glacier National Park, of the water slide his son still hadn't found the courage to try. That's not going to happen, Marcus said with quiet determination. Whatever we need to do to avoid that outcome, we do it. Dr. Foster's expression softened slightly. Your attitude will help, but I need you to understand the gravity of your situation. These next few days will be critical. After she left, Marcus lay in the sterile hospital room staring at the ceiling tiles. The medication dulled the pain in his ankle, but did nothing for the ache in his chest. Who would care for Ethan if he was hospitalized for weeks? How would he pay the bills if he couldn't work? What would happen to the life he'd carefully rebuilt after Isabella's death? A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Tommy stood in the doorway, Ethan's small hand clutched in his. Dad. Ethan broke free and rushed to the bedside, stopping short when he saw the bandages and IV. His lower lip trembled. Are you going to be okay? Marcus forced a smile. Of course I am, buddy. The doctors are giving me medicine for my foot, and I'll be good as new before you know it. Ethan's eyes, Isabella's eyes, studied him with a wisdom beyond his years. You promise, the word stuck in Marcus's throat. He'd promised Isabella he'd stay strong for their son. He'd promised Ethan they'd go swimming. Promises seemed dangerous things now. I promise I'm going to fight with everything I've got, he said instead. That evening, after Ethan had been taken back to Tommy's house, with assurances that Marcus just needed to rest in the hospital for a few days, Dr. Foster returned with another doctor in tow, a younger woman with red hair and intense focus. Marcus, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Centers for Disease Control. She'd like to ask you some questions about your activities before you develop the infection. Dr. Vasquez didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Rodriguez, yours is the fourth case of this particular type of chemical contamination I've encountered in the past 2 months, all within a 50-mile radius. The other 3 were significantly less advanced than yours, but the pattern is concerning. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with his fever. The other people, are they okay? They're responding well to treatment, Dr. Vasquez assured him. But none of them could identify a clear source of contamination. You mentioned aquazone. As Marcus described the 4th of July visit, the strange chemical smell, the small cut, he watched the 2 doctors exchange glances. What aren't you telling me? He asked when he'd finished. Dr. Foster sighed. We've received reports of unusual skin conditions from several Millbrook residents over the past few months. Nothing as severe as yours, but enough to raise concerns. The common factor seems to be exposure to water at aquazone. And now we may know why, Dr. Vasquez added grimly. This type of chemical contamination shouldn't exist in a recreational water facility. Something in that water system is creating conditions for industrial-grade chemical exposure. Marcus thought of Robert Kim's worried face, the strange smell, the new safety protocols he'd mentioned. He thought of the town's pride in the facility, donated by Apex Industries, and for the first time, he wondered if his small cut had exposed something far more dangerous than just his own mortality. Recovery, Marcus discovered, was its own kind of battlefield. The hospital room became his new command center, the medical staff his unlikely platoon. Each day brought small victories and painful setbacks as the doctors fought to eliminate the chemical contamination consuming his flesh. The good news, Dr. Foster informed him 1 week into his hospitalization, is that the chelation therapy is working. The metallic compounds in your bloodstream are decreasing. And the bad news? Marcus asked, having learned that with Dr. Foster, there was always a counterbalance. The damage they've done is extensive. We're looking at significant tissue reconstruction once we've completely eliminated the contamination. Her clinical terminology couldn't disguise the reality. His ankle had become a war zone. The enemy was insidious and destructive, leaving behind a landscape of chemical burns and dead tissue. The treatments themselves were excruciating. Twice daily, nurses would remove the dressings, flush the wound with solutions that burned like acid, extract any visible contaminated tissue, apply medicated packing, and rebandage. Marcus endured in silence, teeth clenched, focusing on the photo of Ethan that Tommy had placed on his bedside table. Ethan visited every afternoon after school, brought by Tommy's wife Clara. The first visit had been the hardest, watching his son's face crumple at the sight of him, pale and tethered to machines, trying to maintain a brave front when Ethan asked tearfully if he was going to die like Mommy did. "No, buddy," Marcus had assured him, patting the edge of the bed for Ethan to sit. "I'm not going anywhere. This is just a pit stop, like when we change a flat tire on a road trip. Temporary." As the days passed, Ethan's visits became the sun around which Marcus's hospital existence orbited. They played cards, worked on Ethan's homework, and talked about everything except the wound that kept Marcus confined to his bed. Marcus learned more about his son's inner world in those afternoons than he had in months of their normal routine. Ethan's fear of the 5th grade bully, his secret interest in a girl named Sophie, his worry that he'd never be brave enough to try the Thunder Rapids slide. "You know what, Dad?" Ethan said one afternoon, carefully arranging his Pokémon cards on the rolling tray table. "I think it's okay to be scared sometimes." Marcus looked up, surprised. "What makes you say that?" Ethan shrugged, not meeting his father's eyes. "Mr. Peterson says being brave isn't about not feeling scared. It's about doing stuff even when you're scared." "Mr. Peterson sounds pretty smart," Marcus said softly. "Yeah, and I was thinking." Ethan hesitated. "Maybe it's okay if you're scared too. About your foot and everything." The simple wisdom from his 8-year-old son's mouth hit Marcus harder than any building collapse ever had. The tight control he'd maintained since Isabella's death, the insistence on being the strong one, on never showing weakness, suddenly seemed a disservice to them both. "I am scared, buddy," Marcus admitted, his voice rough. "I'm scared of not getting better fast enough, of not being able to take care of you properly, of letting you down." Ethan's small hand covered his. "You won't let me down, Dad. Mr. Peterson also says we're a team, and teams help each other." Later that night, alone in the quiet hospital room with only the beeping monitors for company, Marcus allowed himself to cry for the first time since Isabella's funeral. For the pain, for the fear, but also for the remarkable child they'd created together, who somehow understood what Marcus himself was only beginning to learn. Investigation into the source of the contamination began while Marcus was still undergoing his 2nd week of treatment. Tommy brought the news during an evening visit, his expression grim as he settled into the visitor's chair. "The CDC has cordoned off Aquazone," he reported. "They're taking water samples, checking the filtration system, interviewing maintenance staff. It's causing quite a stir in town." "What's Apex saying about it?" Marcus asked, Knowing the chemical company's outsized influence in Millbrook, Tommy's mouth tightened. Their official statement is that there's no evidence linking the water contamination to their operations, and that they're cooperating fully with authorities. His air quotes made his skepticism clear. Unofficially, they're putting pressure on the mayor to downplay the whole thing. People are worried about jobs. What about other cases? Dr. Vasquez mentioned 3 others with similar contamination. 6 more have come forward since news got out about your hospitalization, Tommy said. Nothing as severe as yours, mostly persistent skin rashes and chemical burns. All of them frequent Aquazone users. Marcus frowned, memories of his firefighting training in pattern recognition surfacing. Any connection to particular days or times at the park? Tommy raised an eyebrow. Already thought of that. All reported using Aquazone within 48 hours after maintenance days, when Robert Kim does the heavy chemical treatments. Speaking of Kim, Tommy leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the private room. He's gone missing. Missing? Hasn't shown up for work in 4 days. His apartment is locked up tight, car gone. The CDC wanted to question him about the maintenance protocols. The pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture in Marcus's mind. Robert Kim's distracted manner, the unusual chemical smell, the new safety protocols he'd mentioned, and now his disappearance just as authorities started investigating. Something's not right, Marcus muttered. Robert losing his wife last year, now this. Looking into it, Tommy assured him. Got some contacts in the sheriff's office who owe me favors. If there's something to find, I'll find it. True to his word, Tommy returned 2 days later with a manila folder tucked under his arm. He checked the hallway before closing Marcus's door. Found these in the county records, he said, spreading out several documents on the bed. Death certificate for Lisa Kim, Robert's wife. Cause of death listed as acute chemical poisoning due to industrial exposure. Marcus frowned. That's what was officially recorded. But look at this, Tommy pointed to another document. Hospital admission records show she was initially treated for severe chemical burns and respiratory damage before developing the systemic poisoning that ultimately killed her. Marcus stared at the document, a chill running through him. She had the same kind of chemical exposure I have. A year ago, Marcus. A full year before the current outbreak. Tommy's expression was grim. And here's where it gets interesting. Lisa Kim worked in environmental compliance at Apex Industries. Her department handled wastewater testing. Implications hung in the air between them. If Lisa Kim had contracted the same chemical contamination a year earlier, and she worked directly with Apex's waste products, we need to find Robert, Marcus said firmly. He knows something. Already on it, Tommy nodded. But we might need legal help if we're going up against Apex. They've got more lawyers than the Pentagon. I might know someone who can help, came a voice from the doorway. Both men turned to see Dr. Foster standing there, a tall woman with auburn hair at her side. Marcus Rodriguez, meet Victoria Nash, Dr. Foster said. Former environmental prosecutor for the State Attorney General's office, current private practice attorney specializing in corporate pollution cases. Victoria Nash stepped forward, her handshake firm. Dr. Foster filled me in on your situation, Mr. Rodriguez. I've been tracking Apex Industries' environmental compliance issues for years. Why would you be interested in my case? Marcus asked directly. Something flashed in Victoria's green eyes, a brief glimpse of pain quickly controlled. My sister died of a rare form of chemical poisoning 2 years ago. She worked for Apex at their facility in Billings. I've since discovered 19 similar cases among current and former employees. She paused. The company settled with our family privately with a confidentiality agreement. I'm technically violating by telling you this. Why take that risk? Tommy asked. Because they're still doing it, she said simply. Still exposing people to dangerous chemicals, still covering it up, still buying their way out when caught. And now they've apparently moved beyond their employees to endangering an entire community. Marcus studied her for a moment, recognizing the controlled anger, the mission focus. He'd seen it in fellow firefighters who'd found their purpose in something larger than themselves. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "For now, focus on healing," Victoria replied. "Dr. Foster is sending tissue and contamination samples to independent labs for analysis. Once we have those results, combined with the CDC findings and any information we can get from Robert Kim, we'll have our strategy." The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Ethan was sitting with Marcus, working on a science project about ecosystems, when he suddenly looked up with wide eyes. "Dad, I just remembered something about Mr. Kim." Marcus, who had been helping Ethan glue pictures of forest animals onto his poster board, raised an eyebrow. "What about him, buddy?" "That day at Aquazone, the 4th of July, I heard him talking on his phone when I went to get my water bottle from the locker room. He sounded really angry." Ethan's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "He said something like, 'I know what you're doing. I have proof now. Lisa was right.'" Marcus and Tommy exchanged glances. "Did he say who he was talking to?" Marcus asked carefully. Ethan shook his head. But after he hung up, he was writing something in a notebook, a black one with a combination lock on it, like a diary. "He put it in his locker when he saw me." That evening, after Ethan had gone home with Clara, Marcus relayed the information to Victoria over the phone. A locked notebook, she mused, could contain maintenance records, observations, evidence he was gathering. "We need to find it." "And him," Marcus reported, shifting uncomfortably as a wave of pain radiated from his ankle. The latest round of tissue removal had been particularly brutal. "What about the CDC's findings on the water?" "Preliminary results show abnormal chemical compounds consistent with industrial solvents and experimental polymers at low but significant levels," Victoria replied. "Not enough to cause immediate symptoms in most people, but capable of creating chemical burns and systemic contamination, especially with an open wound like your cut." "Exactly," Marcus murmured. "Dr. Foster's theory is that the chemicals themselves aren't uncommon in industrial settings. They're compounds used in advanced manufacturing processes. What's unusual is their presence in a recreational water facility, which she believes was the result of contaminated water being introduced into the system." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at Marcus's door. A nurse entered with his evening medication, followed by Dr. Foster, who was frowning at a tablet in her hands. "I need to go," Marcus told Victoria. Dr. Foster just came in. After hanging up, he looked questioningly at the doctor, whose expression did nothing to ease the sudden tension in his chest. "We've got the latest imaging results," she said without preamble. "The good news is the chemical contamination is almost completely eliminated from your system." She turned the tablet to show him images he couldn't fully interpret, but the grave set of her mouth told him enough. "The bad news is that the tissue damage is more extensive than we hoped. There's early indication of bone involvement." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What does that mean for treatment?" "We need to be more aggressive. I'm recommending hyperbaric oxygen therapy to promote healing, continued debridement, and possibly tissue grafts." She hesitated. "I've also consulted with an orthopedic surgeon in case we need to consider more extensive options." The unspoken word hung between them: amputation. the very outcome he'd been fighting against with every ounce of his considerable will. "How long do we have before that becomes necessary?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the roaring fear beneath. "If we see improvement with the hyperbaric treatment, we may avoid it entirely. If not," Dr. Foster met his eyes directly, 30 days maximum before the bone contamination would become too extensive to save the foot. 30 days. Month to save not just his foot, but everything that represented. His independence, his ability to care for Ethan, the active life they shared together. A month to find the evidence connecting Apex to the contamination that had caused this nightmare. The search for Robert Kim intensified as Marcus began his hyperbaric oxygen treatments. 5 days a week, he was sealed into a pressurized chamber for 2-hour sessions, breathing pure oxygen to stimulate healing. The treatments left him exhausted but determined, marking each day off his mental countdown with grim resolve. 2 weeks into this new regimen, Tommy burst into Marcus's hospital room, eyes bright with discovery. "Found him. Robert Kim is staying at his brother's place in Bozeman. I'm driving up tomorrow to talk to him." "I'm coming with you," Marcus declared. Tommy glanced pointedly at the IV in Marcus's arm. "You're kind of tethered here, buddy. Dr. Foster said I could have a day pass if I stayed off my foot and kept the wound clean," Marcus countered. "This is too important to delegate. Robert knew my condition was possible. His wife died from it. I need to hear from him directly what he knows." The drive to Bozeman the next day was uncomfortable, but necessary. Marcus's foot elevated on the back seat with ice packs to control swelling. Discomfort faded when they pulled up to a modest ranch house in a quiet neighborhood, and he saw the haunted face of Robert Kim watching them from the window. The former Aquazone supervisor looked like he'd aged a decade since the 4th of July, hair unkempt, clothes hanging loosely on his frame, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. "I knew someone would find me eventually," he said quietly after letting them in. "I just hoped I'd have more time to organize everything." "Organize what, Robert?" Marcus asked, settling painfully onto the sofa, his bandaged foot propped on a coffee table. Robert disappeared into a bedroom and returned with a familiar black notebook and several USB drives. "Evidence," he said simply. "I've been collecting it since Lisa died. Water samples, maintenance records, photographs, soil tests from around the drainage pipes." His hands trembled slightly. "Lisa was taking samples from Apex's outflow for months before she got sick. He found elevated levels of chemical compounds that weren't supposed to be there: experimental polymers, industrial solvents, even some compounds without proper safety data." "Did she report it?" Tommy asked. Robert laughed bitterly. "To her supervisors, who thanked her and promised to investigate. 2 weeks later, she was written up for procedural violations. A month after that, she developed the first chemical burn on her arm." His voice broke. Time the doctors figured out what was happening, it was too late. The contamination had reached her bloodstream. "And you believe Apex's waste products created the conditions for chemical contamination?" Marcus said. "It wasn't a question." Robert nodded. "Lisa was convinced of it. After she died, I took the job at Aquazone specifically to monitor the water system. The new filtration system Apex installed for the park connects directly to the watershed that runs behind their plant." He opened the notebook, showing them meticulous records of water testing, chemical levels, maintenance dates. "I've been documenting everything, waiting until I had enough evidence that they couldn't bury it like they did with Lisa." "Why not take this to the authorities sooner?" Tommy demanded. "People are getting sick. Marcus could lose his foot." Robert's face crumpled. "I was afraid. You don't know what they're capable of. After Lisa died, there were threats, break-ins at our house, strange cars following me. I needed enough evidence to make it impossible to ignore, and I needed to find someone powerful enough to protect me when I came forward." He looked at Marcus. "I'm sorry about your foot. When I saw you that day with your son, I should have warned you, close the park, something." Marcus studied the broken man before him, understanding the paralysis that fear could create. "You're doing the right thing now," he said quietly. "That's what matters." As they drove back to Millbrook with Robert's evidence secured, Marcus stared out the window at the passing Montana landscape, thinking about the interconnected paths that had led them all here. Lisa Kim's dedication to her job, Robert's grief-fueled investigation, Marcus's simple desire to spend time with his son at a water park, and beneath it all, a corporation's callous disregard for the lives affected by their decisions. "What are you thinking?" Tommy asked, glancing over at his unusually silent friend. Marcus turned from the window. His expression hardened into the one his fellow firefighters had learned to recognize before a difficult rescue mission. "I'm thinking it's time Millbrook learned exactly what's been happening in their backyard, and I'm the perfect person to tell them." "Because of your foot." "Because I have nothing left to lose," Marcus corrected him. "Apex can't threaten my job, I can't work. They can't intimidate me, I've faced worse. And unlike Robert, I've got an 8-year-old son whose future in this town depends on stopping them now." He pulled out his phone. "Call Victoria. Tell her we've got what we need. It's time to take this public." The Millbrook Community Center had never been so packed, not even for the annual Founders' Day celebration. Word had spread through town like wildfire. Marcus Rodriguez, the respected veteran and single father currently hospitalized with a mysterious infection, was going public with allegations against Apex Industries. Nearly every adult in Millbrook had squeezed into the folding chairs or stood along the walls, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned to openly hostile. Mayor Linda Garrett, a silver-haired woman whose campaign had been generously funded by Apex, stood nervously at the podium, attempting to maintain order. "Folks, please remember this is just an informational town hall. No decisions are being made tonight, and everyone will have a chance to speak." Marcus sat in a wheelchair at the front of the room, his bandaged foot elevated on a cushioned stool. The past 2 days since returning from Bozeman had been a whirlwind of planning with Victoria Nash and Dr. Foster, reviewing Robert Kim's evidence and preparing for this moment. Ethan sat beside him, small hand clutching his father's larger one, sensing the importance of the occasion even if he didn't fully understand it. Victoria Nash stood to address the crowd, her tailored suit and confident demeanor commanding immediate attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Victoria Nash, environmental attorney. I'm here representing Mr. Rodriguez and several other Millbrook residents who have developed serious health conditions linked to contamination at Aquazone Water Park." A murmur rippled through the audience. Victoria held up her hand. "Before anyone dismisses these claims, I want you to see exactly what we're talking about." She nodded to Marcus, who steeled himself before slowly unwrapping the bandages on his foot. Collective gasp rose from the crowd as the wound came into view, a crater of red, angry flesh where healthy tissue should have been, black at the edges where necrosis had set in. In the bright lights of the community center, a faint phosphorescent glow was still visible around the wound's perimeter. This began as a small cut less than an inch long, sustained at Aquazone on the 4th of July. Victoria continued over the horrified whispers. "Mr. Rodriguez is now facing possible amputation if the specialized treatments he's receiving don't reverse the tissue damage from chemical contamination." From the back of the room came a sharp voice. "What does this have to do with Apex? People get infections all the time." Marcus recognized David Morrison, Apex's local operations manager, standing with arms crossed defensively. "I'm glad you asked, Mr. Morrison," Victoria replied smoothly. "We have evidence that Apex Industries has been illegally discharging industrial waste containing experimental chemicals and toxic compounds into the watershed that directly connects to AquaZone's water supply." The projector screen behind her illuminated with charts, photographs, and data from Robert Kim's meticulous records. These chemical compounds created ideal conditions for severe tissue contamination, particularly through open wounds. Mayor Garrett stepped forward, her face flushed. "These are serious allegations without proper verification. Apex Industries has been the backbone of this community for decades. We can't allow unsubstantiated claims to—" "My wife died because of those unsubstantiated claims," came a trembling voice from the side door. Robert Kim stepped into the community center, looking pale but resolute. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd at the appearance of the missing AquaZone supervisor. "Lisa worked in Apex's environmental compliance lab," Robert continued, moving to stand beside Marcus's wheelchair. "She found contamination in the wastewater samples and reported it internally. 2 months later, she developed the same kind of chemical poisoning Mr. Rodriguez has now. By the time doctors identified the source, the chemicals had already entered her bloodstream. She died in agony. The community center had gone completely silent." Robert turned to face David Morrison directly. "You knew David. Lisa brought the reports to you personally before taking them to the department head. You told her she was overreacting." Morrison's face hardened. "I'm not going to dignify these emotional accusations with a response. If Mr. Kim or anyone else has concerns about Apex's environmental compliance, there are proper channels." "We tried the proper channels," Victoria interrupted, advancing down the aisle with a stack of papers. "I have here copies of 7 separate complaints filed with the State Environmental Quality Department regarding Apex's Millbrook facility in the past 4 years. All were investigated and dismissed after minimal review." She paused meaningfully. 4 of the investigators who signed off on those dismissals now work for Apex in various capacities. A low murmur of disquiet spread through the room. Mayor Garrett attempted to regain control of the meeting. "This is becoming inappropriate. We're not a court of law." "No, we're not," Marcus spoke up, his voice carrying through the room with the command presence that had once directed firefighters in emergency situations. "We're a community deciding whether we're willing to let our children swim in poisoned water for the sake of keeping a company happy." He wheeled himself forward slightly, making eye contact with familiar faces throughout the room. "I'm not here to destroy Apex or cost anyone their job. I'm here because my son," he squeezed Ethan's hand, "and every child in Millbrook deserves to grow up in a town where profit doesn't come before safety, where a company can't quietly poison the water and intimidate anyone who speaks up." "That's slander," Morrison shouted. "Apex has always operated within regulatory guidelines." "Then you won't mind if the EPA conducts a full inspection," Victoria countered smoothly, "because I filed the request this morning, along with all of Robert Kim's evidence. Their investigators will be here tomorrow." The atmosphere in the community center shifted palpably, tension crackling through the room. Mayor Garrett attempted once more to defuse the situation. "I think we should adjourn and reconvene after cooler heads. My son has chemical burns on his hands that won't heal," called out a woman from the middle rows. "Started after swim lessons in June. Doctors can't figure it out. My daughter's been having skin problems since she started working maintenance at AquaZone." Another voice added. More voices joined in. A cascade of health concerns previously dismissed as unrelated, now suddenly connected by the revelations of the evening. Marcus watched as the tide of public opinion visibly shifted, faces turning from skepticism to concern to anger through it all. Ethan sat quietly beside him, taking everything in with those solemn eyes that reminded Marcus so much of Isabella. At one point, as the testimonies grew more heated, Ethan leaned over and whispered, "Is this what being brave looks like, Dad?" Speaking up even when it's scary, Marcus felt a surge of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. "Yes, buddy. This is exactly what being brave looks like." David Morrison pushed his way to the front, face mottled with anger. "This is nothing but a transparent attempt at extortion. Mr. Rodriguez here probably sees dollar signs and thinks Apex is an easy target. Well, we won't be bullied by opportunists looking for a payday." The accusation hung in the air for a moment before Marcus slowly rose from his wheelchair, balancing on his good foot, refusing Tommy's attempt to help him. "Mr. Morrison," he said quietly, the room falling silent to hear him. "I spent 12 years as a firefighter, running into burning buildings while others ran out. I've seen men die for principles, for each other, for the belief that some things matter more than money or comfort or convenience." He gestured toward his ruined foot. "I came home to raise my son in peace after my wife died. All I wanted was a quiet life. I didn't ask for this fight, but I'm standing here barely because I won't let what happened to me happen to anyone else's child. Not for money, not for anything." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Throughout the room, people who had known Marcus for years, clients from Peak Fitness, parents from Ethan's school, neighbors who had watched him struggle and persevere after Isabella's death, nodded in silent acknowledgement of the truth of his character. Sensing the shifting mood, Mayor Garrett attempted damage control. "Perhaps there's a middle ground here. I'm sure Apex would be willing to conduct additional testing, maybe contribute to a health fund for affected residents." While continuing business as usual, Victoria interjected, "That's not acceptable. You need immediate shutdown of any discharges into the watershed, comprehensive health screening for all Millbrook residents, full disclosure of all chemicals used in Apex's processes, and medical coverage for anyone affected by the contamination." "That's outrageous," Morrison sputtered. "The economic impact of those demands would be devastating. Do you know how many people in this room would lose their jobs?" From the back of the room came a new voice, steady and authoritative. "And how many more might lose their lives if nothing changes?" Heads turned to see Dr. Foster standing in the doorway, a file folder in her hands. The CDC doctor moved purposefully to the front of the room. "I have just received preliminary results from the independent laboratory analysis of the tissue samples removed from Mr. Rodriguez's wound," she announced, her clinical tone cutting through the heated emotions in the room. "The contamination consists of experimental polymer compounds and industrial solvents that have created a synergistic toxic effect, causing aggressive tissue necrosis and bioluminescent cellular damage. A combination that shouldn't exist outside of a controlled laboratory environment." She turned to face Morrison directly. "In my professional opinion, there is no plausible explanation for this contamination pattern other than exposure to experimental industrial chemicals that have not been approved for environmental release. And based on the timeline of cases, it's been happening for at least 18 months. The revelation landed like a physical blow throughout the room. Apex employees looked at each other in confusion and dawning horror. Parents instinctively moved closer to their children. Mayor Garrett's face had gone from red to ashen. "I'd like to add something," came another voice. A middle-aged man in Apex work clothes stood up hesitantly. "I work in waste management at the plant. For the past year, we've been processing unmarked containers through the back facility twice a week, always after midnight. No paperwork, no labels. When I asked my supervisor about it, he said it was a special project, and to forget I'd seen anything. The dam had broken. More Apex workers began speaking up about mysterious illnesses among colleagues, about warnings to avoid certain areas of the plant, about late-night activities that violated standard safety protocols. The very people Apex had counted on for silence were finding their voices. One by one, through it all, David Morrison's expression shifted from anger to calculation to something approaching fear. He made a show of checking his watch, then moved toward the exit. This has devolved into a witch hunt. Apex will address these concerns through appropriate legal channels. Running to warn your bosses, David, Robert called after him. Tell them it's too late. The truth is already out. As Morrison pushed through the doors, Marcus felt Ethan tugging at his hand. He carefully lowered himself back into the wheelchair, suddenly aware of the throbbing pain in his foot that he'd been ignoring through sheer force of will. Are the bad chemicals why you might lose your foot, Dad? Ethan asked, his voice small but clear enough that those nearby could hear. The simple question from a child's lips accomplished what all the evidence and testimony hadn't quite managed. Marcus saw it in the faces around them, the moment when the issue transformed from an abstract dispute about corporate responsibility into a deeply personal matter of children's safety. Ethan had unwittingly cut through the politics to the heart of the matter. Yes, buddy, Marcus answered equally clearly. Maybe by speaking up, we can make sure no one else has to go through this. Mayor Garrett cleared her throat, political instincts finally aligning with the unmistakable public sentiment. I believe we've heard enough to warrant immediate action. I'm officially requesting that Apex Industries cease all operations at the Millbrook facility, pending a full environmental and safety review. The declaration was met with applause, cheers, and visible relief from many in the audience. As the meeting broke into smaller groups of intense discussion, Victoria leaned down beside Marcus's wheelchair. This is just the beginning, she warned quietly. Apex won't go down without a fight. Their corporate attorneys will be here by morning, and they'll pull every political string they can reach. Marcus nodded, watching Ethan chatting animatedly with Robert Kim, the boy seemingly unburdened now that the secret concerns were out in the open. Let them come, he said. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds. What neither Marcus nor anyone else in the community center noticed was the man in the back row quietly filming the proceedings with his phone. As the town hall dispersed, he slipped out a side door, got into an unmarked sedan, and made a call to a number few people had direct access to. Sir, he said tersely, we have a problem in Millbrook, a big one. Morning after the town hall, Marcus woke to find Dr. Foster standing at the foot of his hospital bed, her face grave. The sense of victory from the previous night evaporated as she placed his latest scan results on the rolling tray table. The hyperbaric treatments aren't producing the results we hoped for, she said without preamble. The tissue damage is continuing to spread despite the elimination of the chemical contamination. We're seeing early signs of osteomyelitis bone infection. Marcus stared at the black and white images, trying to process what they meant. How much time do we have before amputation becomes necessary? 2 weeks, maybe less. Dr. Foster's clinical tone couldn't disguise the compassion in her eyes. I've scheduled a consultation with Dr. Benjamin Torres, our top orthopedic surgeon, for tomorrow morning. The words landed like physical blows. 2 weeks. After everything, the pain, the treatments, the public stand against Apex, he might still lose his foot. Marcus thought of Ethan, of the promise he'd made to be strong, to be there for his son as both mother and father. There has to be another option, he said, voice tight with controlled emotion. Doctor, Foster sat in the chair beside his bed. There's an experimental tissue regeneration protocol being conducted at the Mayo Clinic. It's shown promise in cases similar to yours, but it's intensive, expensive, and not covered by insurance. And even with that treatment, there's no guarantee. Marcus nodded slowly, mind already calculating finances. His firefighter's pension and savings might cover it, but that was Ethan's college fund, their security for the future. "I'll make some calls," Dr. Foster continued. "See if we can get you considered for the program. In the meantime, we'll continue with our current treatment plan and hope for improvement." After she left, Marcus lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling tiles. For the first time since his diagnosis, he allowed himself to truly contemplate a future with a prosthetic foot. Would he still be able to work as a personal trainer, to play catch with Ethan in the backyard, to hike the mountain trails they loved so much? His dark thoughts were interrupted by Tommy bursting into the room, face flushed with anger. "You're not going to believe this," he said, tossing the morning newspaper onto Marcus's bed. "Apex's counterattack has begun." The front page headline of the Millbrook Herald read, "Chemical company denies contamination claims, cites mass hysteria led by disgruntled former employee." The article quoted Apex's corporate communications director, characterizing Robert Kim as an emotionally unstable individual grieving his wife's death and seeking to assign blame, and described Marcus as a man experiencing serious medical issues that have no scientific connection to our operations. "There's more," Tommy said grimly. "Victoria called this morning. Robert Kim was in a car accident last night on his way home from the town hall. He's in the ICU at Bozeman General." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Accident. His brakes failed on the mountain highway. Car went off the road and rolled 3 times. He's in critical condition. Implications hung heavy in the hospital room. Robert Kim had been their key witness, the one person with first-hand knowledge of both Lisa's discoveries and the subsequent cover-up. "That's not a coincidence," Marcus said quietly. "Victoria doesn't think so either. She's trying to get police protection for him, but without proof of foul play." Tommy shrugged helplessly. Over the next few days, Apex's counteroffensive gained momentum. Local television ran interviews with company scientists who explained patiently why the alleged chemical contamination couldn't possibly cause the effects being claimed. The Herald published profiles of anxious Apex employees worried about their families' futures if the plant were to close. Mayor Garrett, backtracking from her bold stance at the town hall, now called for careful, measured investigation without rushing to judgment. Most disturbing were the subtle changes in how people treated Ethan. Clara reported that some parents had stopped allowing their children to play with him at recess. His teacher had moved his desk away from other students, supposedly for a special project. One afternoon, he arrived at the hospital in tears after an older boy had called him "toxic kid" on the school bus. "Why are they being mean to me, Dad?" Ethan asked, curled against Marcus's side in the hospital bed. "I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus held his son close, rage and helplessness warring within him. "No, buddy, you didn't. Sometimes when people are scared about their jobs or their money, they forget what's really important. And Apex has a lot of people scared right now." "Are you scared?" Ethan's question was muffled against Marcus's hospital gown. "Only about not being the dad you deserve," Marcus admitted softly. That night, alone in his room, Marcus finally allowed himself to acknowledge the pain he'd been pushing aside, not just the physical agony of his foot, but the deeper anguish of possibly failing his son. of breaking his promise to Isabella. The thought of Ethan facing cruelty at school, while Marcus lay helpless in a hospital bed, was almost more than he could bear. Dr. Torres, the orthopedic surgeon, arrived the next morning for their consultation. Marcus had already made his decision. "I want to schedule the amputation," he said before the doctor could even begin his assessment. "Doctor," Torres looked startled. "Mr. Rodriguez, while that may ultimately be necessary, I'd like to explore all options first. There are several approaches we haven't." "My son is suffering while this drags on," Marcus interrupted. "Every day I'm in this hospital is another day he faces this town alone. I need to be mobile, functional, present for him as quickly as possible." Marcus, Dr. Foster, who had entered behind Dr. Torres, stepped forward. "We just received word from the Mayo Clinic. They're willing to consider you for the experimental protocol. It could save your foot." "How long would the treatment take?" Dr. Foster hesitated. "Minimum of 10 weeks inpatient care in Rochester, followed by months of rehabilitation. And Ethan would stay where during that time? Continue to face this alone?" The doctors exchanged glances, having no answer for the impossible situation facing the single father. "Schedule the amputation," Marcus repeated firmly. "I'll adapt to a prosthetic. What I can't adapt to is abandoning my son when he needs me most." That afternoon, Victoria arrived with more troubling news. The EPA investigation that had been promised with such conviction was being scaled back to a preliminary assessment. 3 of the 7 other Millbrook residents who had come forward with similar contamination had suddenly withdrawn their testimonies, refusing to speak further about their conditions. "Apex is systematically dismantling our case," Victoria said, pacing the small hospital room. "They've got people terrified about the economic impact if the plant closes, and without Robert able to testify." "How is he?" Marcus asked. Victoria's expression darkened. "Still unconscious. The doctors aren't optimistic about a full recovery. And here's the worst part. The police investigation into the brake failure has already been closed. Mechanical malfunction due to poor maintenance." Marcus stared out the window at the mountain peaks visible in the distance, the Apex Industries logo prominently displayed on a billboard against the skyline. The company's reach extended into every aspect of the town's existence. "They're going to get away with it, aren't they?" he asked quietly. "Not if I can help it," Victoria replied, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "But I won't lie to you, Marcus. The momentum is shifting. People are scared for their livelihoods. Without hard evidence that directly links Apex to the contamination evidence that can't be explained away or discredited, we're fighting an uphill battle." Marcus nodded slowly, a cold resolve settling over him. "Then we need to get that evidence." "How Robert was our inside connection, and he's—" "There are other ways," Marcus interrupted, thinking of his firefighting training, of emergency response in dangerous situations. "Tommy still has contacts in law enforcement. You have legal resources, and I have nothing left to lose." Victoria studied his face, seeing the determination there. "Marcus, whatever you're thinking, be careful. These people have already tried to silence Robert. They wouldn't hesitate to what? Kill me." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Too late." As Victoria left, promising to return with any updates, Marcus reached for his phone and called Tommy. Their conversation was brief, focused, practical, the kind of planning they'd done countless times in emergency situations. That evening, as the hospital grew quiet for the night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of his decision heavy on his chest. Tomorrow he would sign the consent forms for the amputation, surrendering a part of himself to be present for his son. The thought brought both grief and a strange sense of peace. Some sacrifices were necessary, worth the cost. Outside his window, storm clouds gathered over Millbrook, lightning occasionally illuminating the apex plant in the distance. Marcus watched the flashes, thinking of Isabella, of Ethan, of the town they'd chosen because it seemed safe and wholesome. "I won't let them win," he whispered to the darkness. "Whatever it takes." In that moment, he had no way of knowing that across town, in a dimly lit intensive care unit, Robert Kim's eyes had just flickered open for the first time since his accident, or that the first words he would whisper to the night nurse would change everything. The morning Marcus was scheduled to sign his amputation consent forms. A commotion in the hospital corridor drew his attention. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the squeak of gurney wheels on polished floors. He pushed himself to a sitting position, curiosity momentarily overriding the dread that had settled in his chest overnight. Tommy appeared in the doorway, breathless with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, moving quickly to Marcus's bedside. "Robert Kim is awake, and he's talking." Marcus's pulse quickened. "What's he saying?" "That's just it. He claims he wasn't just collecting evidence about the water contamination. He says Lisa was systematically documenting everything before she died. Test results, internal memos, emails, a complete paper trail proving Apex knew about the chemical discharge and its effects." Hope, that dangerous emotion Marcus had been carefully suppressing, flickered to life. "Where is this documentation?" "That's the kicker," Tommy said, lowering his voice though they were alone. "Lisa knew she was being watched, so she hid everything in the one place no one from Apex would think to look, her safety deposit box at First National Bank. According to Robert, there's enough evidence in there to shut down the entire operation." Marcus stared at his friend, mind racing through the implications. "Have you told Victoria? She's on her way to the bank now with a court order, just in case anyone tries to stop her." "But Marcus," Tommy hesitated, his expression sobering. "This doesn't change what's happening with your foot. Dr. Foster was just telling me they've scheduled the surgery for tomorrow morning." "I know," Marcus said quietly, "but it might change everything else. For Ethan, for the town, that's what matters now." The hours crawled by, Marcus's thoughts alternating between the impending surgery and desperate hope for what Lisa Kim's hidden evidence might contain. He'd signed the consent forms with a steady hand, Dr. Foster watching him with a mixture of professional detachment and personal regret. "We'll take good care of you, Marcus," she'd promised. "The prosthetic technology today is remarkable. Many patients return to nearly all their previous activities." Marcus had nodded, appreciating her attempt at comfort, while knowing that nothing could truly prepare him for the reality he was facing. He'd spent the afternoon with Ethan, carefully explaining what was going to happen, answering his questions with as much honesty as an 8-year-old could handle. "Will it hurt?" Ethan had asked, eyes wide with concern. "Not for long," Marcus assured him. "And then I'll have a special foot that might even be stronger than my old one, like a superhero." Ethan had smiled at that, something like that. Now, as evening approached with still no word from Victoria, Marcus found himself growing increasingly restless. He was about to call Tommy for an update when his phone buzzed with a text message. "Turn on the local news now." Marcus reached for the remote control, switching on the small television mounted in the corner of his hospital room. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar face of Janet Morrison, Millbrook's veteran news anchor, her expression unusually grave. "We interrupt regular programming to bring you breaking news regarding Apex Industries and allegations of environmental contamination in Millbrook. she began. Documents obtained exclusively by Channel 8 News appear to show a systematic cover-up of illegal chemical discharge into local water sources, including the watershed connected to Aquazone Water Park. The camera cut to Victoria Nash standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters, holding up a thick folder of documents. These internal memos, test results, and emails conclusively prove that Apex Industries was aware of dangerous contamination for at least 2 years, and deliberately concealed this information from regulatory agencies and the public, she stated. Most disturbing are the medical reports indicating that company executives were aware of the potential for chemical poisoning facilitated by these compounds, yet took no action to protect the community. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as the camera panned to show a large photograph of Lisa Kim displayed on an easel beside Victoria. This evidence was meticulously compiled by Lisa Kim, a former Apex environmental compliance supervisor, who later died from complications of the very chemical poisoning she was investigating. Before her death, she ensured this evidence would be preserved, knowing the truth would eventually come to light. The broadcast cut to footage of EPA officials in hazmat suits collecting samples at the Apex facility, followed by images of police cars parked outside the company's main offices. Janet Morrison's voiceover continued. The state attorney general has announced an immediate criminal investigation, and the EPA has ordered a complete shutdown of Apex's Millbrook operation, pending a full environmental assessment. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the story continued to unfold. Interviews with state officials promising swift action, statements from environmental experts about the potential long-term effects of the contamination, reactions from shocked Millbrook residents. Most surprising was footage of Mayor Garrett, who just days ago had been backpedaling on her criticism of Apex, now standing alongside state investigators and declaring, "The health and safety of our citizens must always take precedence over corporate interests." The hypocrisy might have been laughable if the situation weren't so tragic, Marcus thought. He thought of Lisa Kim, methodically gathering evidence while the poison that would eventually kill her coursed through her body. He thought of Robert, keeping his wife's final mission alive at great personal risk. His phone rang, Victoria calling from outside the courthouse. "Are you watching?" she asked without preamble. "Every second of it," Marcus confirmed. "Lisa Kim is the real hero here, along with Robert," Victoria agreed. "But Marcus, there's something else you should know. The documents include specific information about the chemical compounds involved in the contamination. Dr. Foster is reviewing them now, but she thinks they might help with your treatment. The chemical poisoning you of Lisa documented its exact progression, and the company's internal research on potential treatments they never shared with doctors." Marcus felt a surge of conflicting emotions, hope for himself, rage at the company that had withheld potentially life-saving information, grief for Lisa and others who had suffered needlessly. "What does this mean for my surgery tomorrow?" he asked. "Dr. Foster wants to postpone it until she's had time to fully review the research. She's consulting with specialists right now. Marcus, there might be a way to save your foot after all." After hanging up, Marcus sat in the quiet hospital room, watching as the news coverage continued to unfold like a surreal dream. An anonymous whistleblower from within Apex had come forward, confirming Lisa's documentation and adding details about the company's internal discussions regarding the contamination. Former employees were breaking their silence, describing a corporate culture of secrecy and intimidation. The dam had truly broken. A soft knock at his door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Dr. Foster entered, accompanied by a doctor he didn't recognize, a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone at the top of her field. "Marcus, this is Dr. Helen Rodriguez from the Mayo Clinic," Dr. Foster said. "She's the leading researcher on the tissue regeneration protocol I mentioned." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've reviewed your case and the newly available information about the specific chemical agents involved in your contamination. I believe you're an excellent candidate for our protocol." "The amputation?" Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope. "We're canceling it," Dr. Foster confirmed. "Dr. Rodriguez has arranged for you to be transferred to Mayo Clinic tomorrow morning. The treatment is intensive and will require significant time, but based on Lisa Kim's documentation of the chemical properties, we now understand exactly what we're dealing with and how to counteract it." Marcus struggled to process this sudden reversal of fortune. "What about Ethan? I can't leave him for weeks while I'm in Rochester." Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "We've arranged accommodations for him as well. The program includes family support. We found that patients recover more successfully when their loved ones are nearby." Later that evening, as Marcus explained the new developments to Ethan during their nightly phone call, he found himself overwhelmed by the whiplash of emotions, from resignation to hope, from despair to possibility. "So you're keeping your foot?" Ethan asked, his voice bright with relief. "They're going to try their best," Marcus answered truthfully. "And you'll be coming with me to Rochester while they do. Like an adventure." Marcus smiled at his son's resilience. "Exactly like an adventure." After saying good night, Marcus sat watching the continued news coverage, where Robert Kim was now being hailed as a hero rather than a disgruntled employee. The Apex executives who had dismissed him so casually were being shown in police custody, faces shielded from cameras as they were led into the county courthouse. The truth, hidden for so long beneath layers of corporate protection and community dependence, had finally risen to the surface. Just like the chemicals that had worked their way through Marcus's flesh invisible until they could no longer be denied. 1 year later, Marcus Rodriguez stood at the edge of the Aqua Zone water park pool, watching as Ethan approached the Thunder Rapids slide with determined steps. The boy, now 9, paused at the ladder, glancing back at his father with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Go on, buddy," Marcus encouraged, his weight shifting slightly on his left foot, his own foot, saved by the innovative tissue regeneration treatment at Mayo Clinic. The months of intensive therapy had been grueling, but each painful step of recovery had been worth it for moments like this. Ethan climbed the ladder, his small figure silhouetted against the Montana sky. He walked to the edge of the slide platform, toes curling over the edge as he had done countless times before, always retreating at the last moment. But today felt different. Marcus could see it in his son's posture, the subtle shift from hesitation to resolve. "Remember what Mr. Peterson said," Marcus called up. "Being brave isn't about not feeling scared." Ethan nodded, took a deep breath, and launched himself down the slide. His delighted shouts echoed through the air as he spiraled down the twisting blue tube, splashing into the crystal-clear water below with perfect form. When he surfaced, his face was split with a grin of pure triumph. "I did it, Dad, I did it." "You sure did," Marcus agreed, his chest tight with pride as Ethan swam to the ladder. "Your mom would be so proud of you." The mention of Isabella no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Time had softened the edges of grief, transforming it into something gentler, a bittersweet companion, rather than a crushing weight. The newly rebuilt Aqua Zone gleamed around them, a symbol of Millbrook's rebirth. After the full extent of Apex's contamination had been revealed, the facility had been completely gutted and reconstructed under the strictest environmental standards. funded by the first installment of the massive settlement the company had been forced to pay. Robert Kim, still walking with a slight limp from his injuries, but otherwise recovered, served as the park's new director. Marcus spotted him now across the pool deck, carefully checking the new automated water testing station with the same meticulous attention he had once used to document Apex's misdeeds. "Mr. Kim," Ethan called, waving excitedly as he climbed out of the pool. "I went down Thunder Rapids." Robert looked up, smiling warmly. "I saw that, Ethan." Excellent form on the splash landing. As Ethan ran off to join a group of children his age, many of them the same kids who had once shunned him as toxic kid, Marcus made his way around the pool to Robert. "How's the water today?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The new monitoring system installed as part of the settlement displayed real-time water quality metrics on screens throughout the facility. "Perfect as always," Robert replied. "Orderly independent testing came back yesterday, not a trace of anything that shouldn't be there." He glanced toward the wall where a bronze plaque bore Lisa Kim's name and likeness. She would have appreciated the redundant testing protocols. Marcus nodded, following Robert's gaze to the memorial. "She saved a lot of people, including me. She would have liked you," Robert said quietly. "Stubborn, principled. You two are cut from the same cloth." The observation pleased Marcus more than he could express. In the months since the Apex scandal had broken open, Lisa Kim had become something of a folk hero in Millbrook, the conscientious employee who had risked everything to expose the truth, continuing her work even as the same contamination slowly killed her. The door to the pool area opened, and Victoria Nash entered, dressed not in her usual courtroom attire, but in casual clothes, a folder tucked under her arm. She spotted Marcus and Robert making her way toward them with purpose in her stride. "Gentlemen," she greeted them. "Beautiful day for a swim." "Ethan finally conquered Thunder Rapids," Marcus told her, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Victoria's smile was genuine. "A big day, then, and about to get bigger." She handed the folder to Marcus. "The final settlement papers were approved this morning. The Millbrook Community Health Foundation is officially funded $200 million to provide lifetime medical monitoring and care for everyone affected by the contamination." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the legal documents that represented the culmination of a year's worth of battles. The foundation had been his idea, a way to ensure that no one in Millbrook would ever again have to choose between proper medical care and feeding their family, as so many had been forced to do during Apex's reign. "What about the criminal cases?" Robert asked, his expression darkening slightly. 4 executives will begin serving prison terms next month," Victoria replied, "including David Morrison." The judge wasn't moved by their claims of ignorance, especially after Lisa's documentation proved they'd been briefed on the dangers repeatedly. The Apex plant itself sat empty now at the edge of town, its buildings awaiting demolition and environmental remediation. Many had feared economic catastrophe when the facility closed, but the reality had proven less dire. The settlement included funds for job retraining, and several smaller, cleaner industries had already begun establishing operations in Millbrook, attracted by the skilled workforce and the town's newfound commitment to environmental responsibility. "Dad, watch this." Ethan called from the slide platform, preparing for another descent. Marcus turned, giving his son a thumbs up of encouragement. "He's resilient," Victoria observed, "like his father." Marcus smiled, thinking of the journey they'd been through, the pain, the fear, the fight that had nearly cost him his foot, and so much more. "He's stronger than I am," always has been. As they watched Ethan execute a slightly more elaborate slide technique, Victoria hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about my offer? The foundation needs a director who understands what these families are going through, someone they trust." Marcus had been considering the offer for weeks, a chance to help guide the very organization that would ensure no one in Millbrook ever faced what he had. The position would mean a stable income, regular hours, and most importantly, the opportunity to continue the work that had unexpectedly become his mission. "I think I'm ready to say yes," he told her, watching as Ethan surfaced, searching immediately for his father's approval. Later, as the afternoon sun began to lower, Marcus and Ethan walked home together along Millbrook's tree-lined streets. The town looked the same as it always had: modest homes with well-kept yards, neighbors chatting across fences, children riding bikes on sidewalks. But beneath the familiar surface, everything had changed. "Are you happy, Dad?" Ethan asked suddenly, looking up with those eyes that still reminded Marcus so much of Isabella. Marcus considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The past year had been the hardest of his life. The physical pain, the grueling rehabilitation, the public battle against a powerful corporation. Yet somehow, through all of it, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever after Isabella's death: purpose, community, and a strange kind of peace. "Yes," he answered truthfully, squeezing his son's hand. "I am." As they turned onto their street, Marcus noticed new construction beginning on the vacant lot at the corner, the future site of the Millbrook Medical Center, another project funded by the settlement. The sign out front bore a simple dedication: "In memory of Lisa Kim and all those who suffered in silence." Some battles, Marcus had learned, were worth fighting no matter the cost. Some sacrifices, like Lisa's, like Robert's, like his own, created ripples that transformed entire communities. What had begun with a small cut at a water park had exposed a wound in the heart of Millbrook itself. A wound that, now properly treated, was finally beginning to heal. Ethan ran ahead to greet their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who attended to him during the worst days of Marcus's illness. Marcus followed more slowly, each step a reminder of how close he had come to losing so much more than his foot. Ache that sometimes still radiated from the healed tissue was, in its way, a gift, a reminder to never again take for granted the simple joy of walking beside his son on a warm Montana evening. As we grow older, we understand that life's greatest battles often arrive unannounced, like Marcus Rodriguez's innocent day at the water park that changed everything. Remember when our generation believed that working hard and playing by the rules would keep our families safe? Marcus's story reminds us that sometimes the systems we trusted can fail us, but our courage need not falter. Many of us have faced our own devastating diagnosis, watched our children struggle, or stood alone against powerful interests that seemed untouchable. We know that moment when fear threatens to overwhelm us, when we look at those who depend on us and wonder if we'll be strong enough. But like Marcus, we've learned that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about what we do when we've been knocked down. It's about finding the courage to speak truth even when our voices shake. It's about teaching our grandchildren that one person of integrity can still change everything. And perhaps most importantly, it's about recognizing that vulnerability isn't weakness, that sometimes admitting we're scared is the bravest thing we can do. Marcus's journey reminds us that even in our golden years, we still have the power to leave this world better than we found it. His story shows us that sometimes the most ordinary moments, a father taking his son swimming, can become the catalyst for extraordinary change. In the end, it wasn't Marcus's background as a firefighter that made him a hero. It was his willingness to stand up when it mattered, to fight for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible, and to never lose sight of what truly mattered, protecting the innocent and ensuring that no other family would have to endure what his had suffered. As the sun sets on another day in Millbrook, children splash safely in crystal clear water, parents watch without fear, and a community that nearly lost its soul has found its way back to what matters most. Sometimes that's all the victory we need. Mineral-rich steam rising from the hot springs couldn't mask the metallic scent of something wrong. Alina Martinez sat on the edge of the natural stone pool, her knuckles pale as she gripped the rough granite beneath her. Dr. James Mitchell's latex-covered fingers hovered over the angry, weeping lesion that had claimed Alina's left shoulder blade like some ancient curse. This might cause some discomfort, Dr. Mitchell warned, his voice steady despite the concern darkening his weathered features. Lena nodded, jaw clenched. What was one more pain? The burning, crawling sensation had become her constant companion these past 3 weeks. The doctor's fingers pressed down gently at first, then with more purpose. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The center of the lesion bulged, then ruptured. A yellowish fluid with specks of something moving, dear God, actually moving, erupted from the wound. Dr. Mitchell's sharp intake of breath filled the sudden silence. The nurse behind him dropped the specimen container with a clatter. "Get me containment equipment now," Dr. Mitchell shouted, pressing sterile gauze to the wound. "And call Dr. Peterson in infectious diseases. Tell him we have a live specimen." Alina's vision tunneled. Live, what's something? Dr. Mitchell answered her unfinished question, his professional mask slipping for just an instant. Something that should never have been swimming with you. Alina Martinez had once believed that fresh starts came with instruction manuals. At 38, with divorce papers still warm from the printer and a moving truck full of half her life, she'd chosen Millbrook as her redemption story. The brochure for Sunset Vista Resort had promised natural healing waters and affordable mountain living, and the sprawling hot springs visible from her second-floor cabin had sealed the deal. A former nurse turned elementary school teacher, Alina saw those steaming pools as both therapy and promise. The elementary school where she'd secured a position, teaching 4th grade, sat just 3 miles down the winding mountain road. Perfect for her morning commutes, she'd thought. Perfect for rebuilding. The principal had been impressed with her dual background in healthcare and education, desperate to fill the position before fall semester. "The children of Millbrook will be lucky to have you, Miss Martinez," he'd said. And for the first time in 2 years, Alina had felt something like purpose, Dr. James Mitchell was not originally from Millbrook. The small mountain town had recruited him from the Centers for Disease Control with promises of research opportunities and the chance to study environmental health in an underserved community. At 45, with specializations in epidemiology and tropical diseases, he was overqualified for the regional health clinic. But after losing 3 patients to a misdiagnosed hemorrhagic fever outbreak, a case that still haunted his dreams, he'd needed his own fresh start away from the pressure cooker of emergency response medicine. Millbrook had seemed like a place where medical emergencies meant broken bones from hiking accidents and seasonal allergies. David Chen had taken the resort manager position at Sunset Vista out of desperation 4 years ago. Since his wife's death from cancer, he'd been raising 10-year-old Sophie alone, juggling her medical appointments between shifts. Sophie's type 1 diabetes demanded supplies and monitoring equipment that their insurance barely covered, and the resort job came with housing in the manager's cottage. He'd been an environmental science major once, decades ago, before life took its detours. He understood the delicate balance of minerals and bacteria required for safe natural springs. He also understood the even more delicate balance of his bank account. Little Maya Rodriguez sat in the front row of Alina's class, always eager with a raised hand and a perfectly organized binder. Her mother Carmen worked double shifts at 2 hotels in town, watched Maya's interactions with hawk-like attention, and harbored secrets beneath her exhausted smile. None of them knew how their lives would collide in the mineral-rich waters of Sunset Vista Resort. Lena's summer routine had established itself with the predictability of mountain tides. Each morning she'd wake at 6, review lesson plans over coffee, then slip into her navy blue one-piece for an hour of soaking in the therapeutic springs before the pools became crowded with tourists and locals. The hot water had become her sanctuary, the rhythmic heat, breathe, relax meditation that calmed her racing thoughts and soothed the lingering ache of her failed marriage. It was during the 3rd week of July when she first noticed the spring's condition deteriorating. The water had taken on a slightly murky quality, and occasionally the sulfur smell seemed overpowering, burning her nostrils more than usual. Other days, the mineral scent was barely detectable. At the pool's edge, a faint greenish film had begun to appear along the natural rock formations. "Excuse me," she'd approached David one morning, towel wrapped around her shoulders. "Is everything okay with the springs? The water seems different." David had glanced up from his maintenance clipboard, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. "Just adjusting the mineral filtration for the summer heat," he'd replied, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing to worry about." Alina had nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to press the issue. She'd seen David's little girl occasionally sitting quietly poolside with a book, her thin legs dangling. There was something in the careful way he spoke to his daughter that resonated with Alina, the gentle attention of someone carrying a heavy weight. The first spot appeared on a Thursday. Alina had noticed it while toweling off after her morning soak, a small reddish bump on her left shoulder blade, no bigger than a dime. It itched slightly, and she'd absently scratched at it while walking back to her cabin, assuming it was a spider bite. Tennessee summers were notorious for the bloodthirsty insects that emerged from the surrounding forest. By Monday, the spot had grown to the size of a quarter and developed a curious yellowish center. The itching had intensified, waking her in the night. Alina applied hydrocortisone cream and told herself it was an allergic reaction, perhaps to new soap or the spring's minerals. Still, she continued her morning soaks. The need for that aquatic therapy outweighed her concerns. "Miss Martinez, are you okay?" It was Maya Rodriguez who first noticed Alina wincing as she reached to write on the whiteboard the following Wednesday. The spot had grown again, angry and inflamed, with small satellite lesions appearing around the main one. "Just a little skin irritation, sweetie," Alina had answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "Nothing serious." But she'd noticed something else that morning, Maya repeatedly scratching at her forearm during math lessons, the girl's fingernails leaving angry red trails across her pale skin. When Alina asked her about it after class, Maya had quickly pulled down her sleeve. "It's nothing, Miss Martinez. Mom says I just have sensitive skin." That evening, Alina decided to speak with David again. She found him testing the spring water, squinting at chemical test strips in the fading daylight. "I think there might be something wrong with the springs," she said without preamble, pushing up her sleeve to reveal her shoulder. "This started after soaking here, and now one of my students has something similar." David's expression hardened as he glanced at her wound, then quickly looked away. With all due respect, Miss Martinez, skin rashes can come from anywhere soap, plants, stress. The springs meet all county health regulations. Have you been testing them daily? Because it looks. I know how to do my job, he snapped, then immediately seemed to regret his tone. Look, I'm sorry. It's been a rough week. Sophie's supplies got more expensive, and the corporate office is cutting corners everywhere. But I promise you, the springs are safe. Alina retreated, unsettled by both his defensiveness and the glimpse into his personal struggles. That night, she examined her shoulder in the bathroom mirror, applying more cream to the now golf ball-sized lesion. The itching had transformed into something more concerning, a burning sensation that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Despite her growing unease, Alina couldn't bring herself to break her morning routine. The hot springs remained her only connection to the person she'd been before her life unraveled. Instead, she began wearing a long-sleeved shirt over her swimsuit, careful to keep her shoulder from direct contact with the water. By Friday of that week, Alina noticed 3 resort guests gathered near the main spring, pointing at the water and speaking in hushed tones. When they saw her approaching with her towel, they dispersed quickly. In the shallow end, what had been a faint green film was now unmistakable, a thick biofilm forming in the corners where the water circulation was weakest. That same afternoon, Maya Rodriguez was absent from class. When Alina called Carmen Rodriguez to check in, the woman's voice was tightly controlled. She has a mild skin infection. The pediatrician prescribed antibiotics. She'll be back Monday, Mrs. Rodriguez. I've noticed Maya scratching her arm. I'm actually experiencing something similar that might be related to the resort springs. Our condition is entirely unrelated to those springs, Carmen interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. And I'd appreciate you not speculating about my daughter's health to others. Good day, Miss Martinez. The line went dead before Alina could respond. That evening, she stood at her bathroom sink, watching with growing horror as the lesion on her shoulder leaked a thin yellowish fluid. The surrounding skin had taken on an angry red hue, and the burning sensation had intensified to the point where even the light pressure of her blouse was unbearable. Alina finally admitted to herself that this was beyond a simple irritation. Tomorrow, she would see a doctor. First, though, she needed to document the spring's condition. Grabbing her phone, she walked down to the now empty resort area in the twilight and began taking photographs. The cloudy water, the biofilm growth, and the clearly empty chemical storage containers stacked haphazardly behind David's maintenance office. What she didn't notice was David watching from the shadows, his face a mask of worry and guilt as he clutched a medical bill stamped, "Final Notice," in one hand and his spring maintenance logbook filled with falsified readings in the other. The urgent care clinic on Maple Street had once been a Victorian mansion, its medical purpose now betrayed only by the discreet sign and the wheelchair ramp zigzagging up to the wraparound porch. Alina sat in what had once been someone's parlor, now filled with outdated magazines and chairs that encouraged brief stays. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the loose cotton of her blouse, the fabric damp where the lesion continued to weep. Alina Martinez. Nurse with kind eyes and efficiency in her movements appeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand. The examination was brief and unsatisfying. Dr. Peterson, a man whose age suggested he'd seen everything, but whose furrowed brow suggested otherwise, studied the lesion with the detached interest of someone cataloging a minor curiosity. "Looks like contact dermatitis to me," he announced after barely 3 minutes of examination. "Probably an allergic reaction to something in those hot springs, sulfur algae bacteria. It happens." "But it's spreading," Alina insisted, pointing to the smaller satellite lesions that had appeared overnight. "And it's leaking this yellow fluid. That can't be normal for eczema, doctor." Peterson's smile was professionally reassuring, yet somehow dismissive. The fluid is just your body's inflammatory response. I'll prescribe a stronger corticosteroid cream and some antihistamines. Keep it clean, try not to scratch, and stay out of those springs for a while. Alina left with a prescription and a growing sense of unease. Something felt fundamentally wrong with the diagnosis, but she wasn't a medical professional anymore, at least not in practice. Perhaps she was overreacting. Perhaps the stress of rebuilding her life in a new town was making her catastrophize a simple skin condition. The pharmacist handed over a tube of cream with warnings about skin thinning and limited duration of use. Apply sparingly, she cautioned, and if it doesn't improve in 3 days, you should see a dermatologist. That night, Alina applied the prescribed cream generously, desperate for relief. By morning, the area had doubled in size. Angry red streaks extended toward her chest. The satellite lesions had grown too, and new ones had appeared on her upper arm. First, the cream seemed to have aggravated the condition, turning the yellow discharge into something thicker and more profuse. Standing before her bathroom mirror, Alina felt a wave of nausea as she examined the spreading infection. Tiny beads of sweat formed on her forehead, and her reflection showed a woman with fever-bright eyes and flushed cheeks. She reached for the thermometer in her medicine cabinet, 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Not dangerously high, but definitely a fever. Still, she dressed for work, covering the lesions with gauze and a cardigan despite the summer heat. She had lesson plans to follow, 23 fourth graders depending on her. A substitute would be impossible to find on such short notice. The Cherokee used these mountains for. Alina's chalk faltered mid-sentence as a stab of pain shot through her shoulder. The piece of chalk clattered to the floor, and 23 pairs of eyes watched as she struggled to raise her arm to continue writing on the blackboard. The simple motion sent lightning bolts of agony down to her fingertips and up into her neck. Miss Martinez. Tommy Gonzalez's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" Your face went all white. Alina forced a smile. "I'm fine, Tommy. Just a little shoulder pain." "Let's continue with." The classroom door had opened without her noticing. Alina Wright, the school principal, stood watching with concern etched across her features. "A word, please," in the hallway. Alina didn't mince words. "You're clearly unwell. Mrs. Patterson saw you struggling yesterday, and now I can see for myself. Whatever this is, you need to take care of it. I can't leave the children mid-lesson. They have their history test tomorrow, and Mrs. Patterson will cover your class for the rest of the day. This isn't a request, Alina. You're pale as a ghost, you're sweating through that cardigan, and you winced in pain when I touched your arm just now." Alina's tone softened. "Go home. See a doctor. The children will be fine." By the time Alina reached her cabin, climbing the wooden steps had become an exercise in endurance. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating from her shoulder. Inside, she collapsed onto her couch, fumbling with her phone to search for symptoms. The results were alarming: cellulitis, necrotizing fasciitis, MRSA infections. Images of similar-looking wounds filled her screen, each with warnings about seeking immediate medical attention. Ringing of her phone startled her. It was Alina. Maya Rodriguez's mother just called. Maya collapsed at home with a high fever. She's being taken to Millbrook Regional Hospital. "Alina, she has an infection on her arm that sounds disturbingly similar to what I glimpsed on yours. I think you should go to the emergency room too." The waiting room at Millbrook Regional Hospital hummed with the particular tension of the genuinely ill mixed with the worried well. Lena sat with her head resting against the cool wall, alternating between chills and waves of heat that left her t-shirt clinging to her back. The lesion had begun to throb in time with her heartbeat, a persistent drummer announcing something sinister. 4 hours passed before her name was called. By then, the sleeve of her t-shirt had soaked through with yellowish fluid, and the fever had climbed to 102.1 degrees Fahrenheit. The triage nurse took one look at her shoulder when she pulled down her sleeve and immediately moved her from non-urgent to priority. "How long has it been like this?" she asked, snapping on fresh gloves to examine the wound. "It started as a small spot about 2 weeks ago, after soaking in the hot springs." Alina's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "And you've been soaking where exactly?" "Sunset Vista Resort. They're natural springs." Nurse made a note, her expression carefully neutral. "Has anyone else from there come in with similar symptoms?" "A student of mine, Maya Rodriguez. Her mother brought her in earlier today." Something flickered across the nurse's face, recognition, concern. "Wait here, I'll be right back." Alina closed her eyes, leaning back against the examination table. The room had begun to spin slightly, objects doubling when she tried to focus. She could hear the nurse speaking urgently at the desk outside, catching fragments. "Second case today, same location, spreading rapidly." When the door opened again, it wasn't the triage nurse who entered, but a man in his mid-40s with intelligent gray eyes and a purposeful manner. His white coat bore an embroidered name, Dr. James Mitchell, M.D. "Miss Martinez, I'm Dr. Mitchell. I understand you have an infection that may be connected to the Sunset Vista Resort Springs." Lena nodded, too exhausted for full sentences. "Doctor." Mitchell gently removed the soaked gauze from Alina's shoulder and went still. The lesion had evolved into something nightmarish, a raised, weeping crater surrounded by inflamed tissue. The edges had begun to darken, and the satellite lesions had merged into an angry constellation across her upper chest and arm. "This is not contact dermatitis," Dr. Mitchell said quietly, his clinical detachment momentarily slipping. "And you're not the first case I've seen today." "Maya," Alina managed. "Yes. And 3 others since then, all with connections to the same hot springs." "Doctor," Mitchell pressed a cool hand to Alina's forehead. "You have a significant fever, and this infection is showing signs of necrotizing tissue. I'm admitting you immediately." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. IVs inserted, blood drawn, antibiotics initiated. Lena drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of medical discussions outside her door. Words like unusual pathogen and resistant organism filtered through her fever-hazed consciousness. Through it all, one thought persisted: the springs, David's defensive posture when she'd questioned him, the biofilm growing in the corners, the inconsistent chemical levels, and now multiple people with mysterious infections. "Dr. Mitchell," she called weakly when the physician returned to check her IV. "To close those springs before more people get sick." "Doctor." Mitchell nodded grimly. "The health department has been notified. They're sending inspectors first thing tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Martinez, I need to ask you some specific questions about the springs and your activities there. We're trying to identify exactly what organism we're dealing with." Alina tried to focus through the fog of fever and medication. "I soak early mornings, usually alone. The water, it changed. Sometimes too much sulfur smell burning my throat, other days hardly any smell at all. And green growing in the corners where the water doesn't circulate." "And did you notice any breaks in your skin before soaking? Any cuts or scrapes that could have provided an entry point?" Alina thought back, then shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I was healthy, just trying to rebuild my life." Something in her tone must have resonated with Dr. Mitchell, whose clinical expression softened momentarily. "Going to figure this out. In the meantime, try to rest. The antibiotics should start bringing down your fever soon." As Alina drifted into an uneasy sleep, She didn't see the troubled expression that crossed Dr. Mitchell's face as he studied the latest test results. Nor did she hear the doctor's hushed phone conversation in the hallway. "We need to run a comprehensive parasite panel. Yes, I know it's unusual in this region, but I've seen something similar during my work in Southeast Asia. And call the CDC. This isn't a typical infection. We're dealing with something that shouldn't be in a Tennessee hot spring." Alina's hospital room took on the strange timelessness that comes with serious illness, a liminal space where night and day blurred together, marked only by the changing of nurses' shifts and the rhythmic dispensing of medications. Through her window, she could see the Blue Ridge Mountains that surrounded Millbrook, their summer foliage a vibrant green that seemed almost offensive in its healthiness, while her own body betrayed her. Dr. Mitchell had become a constant presence, his visits more frequent than standard protocol would dictate. There was something in the doctor's focused attention that both reassured and unsettled Alina, the sense that she had become not just a patient, but a puzzle. "The initial antibiotics aren't having the effect we'd hoped for," Dr. Mitchell explained on the morning of Alina's 4th day in the hospital. He stood at the foot of the bed, tablet in hand, his normally composed features showing faint lines of concern. "The infection is still spreading, albeit more slowly." Alina nodded weakly. The fever had become her constant companion, rising and falling throughout the day, but never fully retreating. The lesion on her shoulder had continued its relentless march across her chest, the pain now requiring regular doses of morphine that left her thoughts scattered like autumn leaves. "You mentioned testing for parasites yesterday," Alina said, struggling to maintain focus through the medication haze. "Did you find something, Doctor?" Mitchell pulled a chair close to the bedside. "We did, actually. The fluid from your wound contains microscopic parasitic organisms, not bacteria or viruses, which is why the antibiotics aren't completely effective. We're adjusting your treatment accordingly. Parasites, from a hot spring," Alina's voice caught between disbelief and horror. "It's unusual but not unprecedented. Poorly maintained thermal springs can harbor various organisms, especially if the filtration and chemical treatment systems aren't functioning properly." Dr. Mitchell hesitated, then added, "The health department inspectors visited Sunset Vista yesterday. The springs have been shut down indefinitely." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, her expression professionally neutral. "Dr. Mitchell, there's a Mr. Chen asking to speak with you. He says it's about the Sunset Vista situation." Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. "The resort manager. Tell him I'll be out in a moment." Turning back to Alina, he squeezed her hand gently. "Rest, I'll check on you again this afternoon." Through the partially open door, Alina caught a glimpse of David in the hallway, disheveled, pale, his hands clutching a manila folder. He looked nothing like the defensive figure who had dismissed her concerns. Now he simply looked afraid. The next visitor arrived that evening, as Alina was picking at a dinner tray of unidentifiable hospital food. Alina Wright entered carrying a vase of cheerful wildflowers and a canvas tote bag bulging with books. "You look terrible," Alina said bluntly, setting the flowers on the windowsill. Alina managed a weak smile. "Thanks for the honesty. How's Maya?" Alina's expression softened. "Stable. She's 2 floors up in pediatrics. Her mother is with her around the clock." She hesitated. "Alina, there are 7 other cases now, all linked to those springs." 7. Alina struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at her shoulder. "Who else?" 3 other children from school, the teenage daughter of the family in cabin 12, Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store, and 2 tourists who were staying at the resort last week. Alina sat down, her normally commanding presence subdued. "The school board is in a panic. Parents are demanding answers. There's talk of filing a class action lawsuit against Sunset Vista." Alina closed her eyes, the weight of collective suffering adding to her physical burden. And David Chen, the resort manager. He's been suspended pending investigation. There are rumors he falsified maintenance logs. The unfairness of it struck Alina with surprising force. He has a sick daughter, Sophie. She needs expensive diabetes supplies. The defense felt strange in her mouth, given that her own body was evidence of his negligence. Alina studied her curiously. Compassion in the midst of your own suffering. You're either a saint or delirious with fever. Maybe both, Alina murmured. After Alina left, Alina drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with water, not the clear, mineral-rich flow of properly maintained springs, but murky, threatening depths where unseen things brushed against her skin. She woke with a start to find Dr. Mitchell standing beside her bed, examining the readouts from the various monitors. "Your fever spiked again," the doctor said without preamble. "We're going to try a different combination of medications." "Did you speak with David Chen?" Lena asked, her voice raspy from sleep. "Doctor." Mitchell's expression shifted subtly. "I did. He provided some illuminating information about the spring's maintenance history or lack thereof." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "He also asked about you, seemed genuinely distressed about your condition." "He's not a bad person," Alina said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Just someone in an impossible situation. Perhaps. But his choices have consequences that extend beyond his own life." Dr. Mitchell's tone was not unkind, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen suffering caused by preventable negligence before. "Try to get some real sleep. We'll talk more in the morning." The following day brought a development that sent ripples of alarm through the hospital. Maya Rodriguez's condition had deteriorated overnight, her smaller body struggling to fight the same infection that had Alina confined to her bed. News came via a tearful nurse who had formed a bond with Alina over their shared concern for the little girl. "Her mother refuses to leave her side," the nurse confided. "Just sits there holding her hand, whispering that she's sorry over and over." The image haunted Alina throughout the day, merging with her own fevered thoughts until she could almost see Carmen Rodriguez's guilt-stricken face hovering in the corners of her hospital room. What exactly was Carmen sorry for? Had she known something about the springs? Had she recognized the danger and failed to warn others? That afternoon, against medical advice, Alina convinced a sympathetic orderly to wheel her to the pediatric floor. Her IV pole rattled alongside the wheelchair as they navigated the sterile corridors, her hospital gown offering little dignity, but her determination offering no alternative. Maya's room was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and the soft sound of a mother's muffled crying. Lena hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain of her purpose here. Carmen Rodriguez sat with her back to the door, her shoulders curved protectively around her daughter's small form. "Mrs. Rodriguez." Alina's voice was barely above a whisper. The woman turned, revealing a face ravaged by fear and exhaustion. Recognition flickered in her red-rimmed eyes, followed by something darker, shame, perhaps, or guilt. "You shouldn't be here," Carmen said, but there was no force behind the words. "I needed to see her." "See you?" Alina gestured for the orderly to wheel her closer to the bed. Maya lay unnaturally still, her pale skin almost translucent against the white hospital sheets. A similar lesion to Alina's had claimed the child's forearm, though smaller in size, a cruel blessing of her earlier diagnosis. "I should have listened to you," Carmen said suddenly, her voice breaking. "When you called about her arm, I knew something was wrong with those springs. I knew it." "Then why?" "Because Maya begged me not to make trouble." The words burst from Carmen like water from a broken dam. "We just moved here after the divorce. She finally had friends. The resort was the center of her social life. When the rash started, she made me promise not to complain, not to be that mom who ruins everything. Carmen covered her face with trembling hands. So I treated it at home, told myself it would clear up, and now look at her. The raw anguish in the woman's voice struck a chord in Alina that resonated with her own history of painful compromises and silent accommodations. Before her divorce, how many times had she ignored warning signs? How many small betrayals had she rationalized away to maintain the illusion of stability? "You were trying to protect her happiness," Alina said softly. "We all make choices thinking we're doing the right thing." Their moment of shared understanding was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, and the sound of hurried footsteps. Dr. Mitchell appeared in the doorway, his normally composed features animated with urgency. "Alina, you need to return to your room immediately. We have results from the latest cultures, and we need to adjust your treatment." His gaze shifted to Maya's still form. "Mrs. Rodriguez will be changing Maya's medication protocol as well." The news spread through the hospital like wildfire, whispered between nurses during shift changes, and discussed in hushed tones at the nurses' station. The parasite infecting Alina, Maya, and the other Sunset Vista victims had been identified, a rare organism typically found in inadequately treated thermal waters in tropical regions, not in Tennessee mountain springs. "How did it even get here?" Alina asked when Dr. Mitchell explained the findings. The doctor had brought enlarged images of the microscope slides, the parasite visible as sinister, elongated forms amid the debris of destroyed tissue. "That's what we're still trying to determine. The most likely explanation is that it was introduced through contaminated chemicals used in the spring treatment process in early July." Dr. Mitchell's expression was grave. Under proper filtration and chemical treatment, these organisms would have been killed immediately. But according to the maintenance logs, David Chen provided the real ones, not the falsified versions. The filtration system has been malfunctioning for months, and the treatment chemicals hadn't been properly applied since last season. Because the corporate office was cutting costs, Alina remembered David's words from their confrontation beside the springs. Precisely. Mr. Chen was caught in the middle, trying to maintain safety standards with inadequate resources while dealing with his daughter's medical bills. Dr. Mitchell shook his head slightly. Not an excuse for falsifying records, but certainly a contributing factor. As Alina's first week in the hospital stretched into a second, the outside world began to intrude on her sterile sanctuary. Local news vans appeared in the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems. Reporters called the hospital repeatedly, seeking interviews with the hot springs parasite victims, a moniker that made Alina cringe when a nurse mentioned it. The school sent a massive card signed by all her students, their wobbly handwriting and earnest well wishes bringing the first genuine smile to Alina's face since her admission. Leaner visited again, bringing updates on the growing community response, a fundraiser for medical expenses, a task force to review all public thermal pools in the county, and increasingly vocal demands for accountability from the Sunset Vista ownership. The corporate office is in full damage control mode, Alina reported, perched on the edge of Alina's bed. They've issued statements claiming they had no knowledge of the maintenance issues and are placing all blame on David Chen. That's not right, Alina protested, her indignation providing a brief surge of energy. He told me they were cutting corners everywhere. He was working with what they gave him. Alina studied her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're defending the man whose negligence put you in this hospital bed, the man whose actions could have killed Maya Rodriguez. Alina looked down at her hands, noting how thin her fingers had become, how prominent the veins stood against her pallor. It's not that simple. He was trapped in an impossible situation. Perhaps. But his choices have consequences. Alina echoed Dr. Mitchell's earlier sentiment unknowingly. That evening, a small, timid knock at Alina's door revealed an unexpected visitor. A thin girl with solemn eyes and a purple headband stood in the doorway, clutching a handmade card. Sophie. Alina recognized David's daughter immediately. The girl nodded, taking a tentative step into the room. Dad doesn't know I'm here. Aunt Susan brought me to visit Maya, and I wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened to you because of our springs. The simple apology, offered with a child's direct sincerity, brought unexpected tears to Alina's eyes. It's not your fault, Sophie. It's not really Dad's fault either, Sophie said, her chin lifting slightly in defense of her father. He tried to tell them about the broken filters lots of times. I heard him on the phone yelling about it, but they said there wasn't money in the budget. Alina gestured for Sophie to come closer. How is your dad doing? The girl's shoulders slumped. Not good. He lost his job and now we might lose our apartment too. And without his insurance, she trailed off, the implications clear even to a child her age. And your treatments? Alina asked gently, on hold for now. Sophie's attempt at a brave smile broke Alina's heart. Dad says we'll figure something out. He always says that. After Sophie left, Alina lay awake long into the night, the girl's words echoing in her mind. The situation had taken on the complex dimensions of real human tragedy, not a simple story of negligence and consequence, but a tapestry of impossible choices, systemic failures, and ordinary people caught in circumstances beyond their control. When Dr. Mitchell arrived for morning rounds, he found Alina sitting up in bed, her notebook, brought by Alina days earlier, open on her lap and filled with hastily scrawled notes. You seem more energetic today, the doctor observed, checking Alina's vital signs with practiced efficiency. I need to speak with someone from the hospital's legal department, Alina said without preamble, and possibly a reporter. Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. May I ask why? Because this isn't just about poorly maintained hot springs anymore. It's about corporate negligence, about profit being prioritized over people's safety. Alina's voice grew stronger with each word. And it's about a healthcare system that forces people like David Chen to choose between proper maintenance of a public facility and life-saving treatment for his daughter. Dr. Mitchell studied his patient with new interest. You're planning to go public with this perspective, to defend the man who's being blamed for your condition. Someone has to speak up for the real truth. Alina gestured to her shoulder, where the lesion had finally begun to show signs of healing under the adjusted treatment protocol. This is painful, yes, terrifying, absolutely, but it's also a symptom of something much bigger and more broken. A small smile played at the corners of Dr. Mitchell's mouth. You know, when I first moved to Millbrook, people told me it was a quiet town where nothing interesting ever happened. He closed Alina's chart with a decisive snap. I'll see what I can do about arranging those meetings for you. As sunlight spilled through the window, painting golden rectangles across her hospital bed, Alina felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Millbrook 4 months earlier. A sense of purpose that transcended her own suffering. A clarity about what needed to be done. Infection that had claimed her body had also, paradoxically, shown her a path forward in this new chapter of her life. What she couldn't know as she began drafting her statement to the press was how her decision would ripple outward, affecting not just her own future, but the lives of David and Sophie Chen, the Rodriguez family, the Sunset Vista community, and ultimately the entire town of Millbrook. Nor could she know that in Dr. Mitchell's office, test results from the latest tissue samples were revealing something even more concerning than they had initially thought. A variant of the parasite that was beginning to show resistance to their current treatment protocol. The examination room in Millbrook Regional's infectious disease ward had been converted into something resembling a small surgical theater. Bright lights illuminated the examination table where Alina now sat. Her hospital gown pulled down to expose the full extent of the lesion that had claimed her left shoulder blade and spread across her upper back. Around her stood Dr. Mitchell, 2 attending physicians, 3 nurses, and a specialist from the CDC who had arrived that morning, all gowned, gloved, and masked as if preparing for a high-risk procedure. "We need to obtain deeper tissue samples," Dr. Mitchell explained, his voice muffled slightly by his surgical mask. "The surface cultures aren't giving us a complete picture of how the parasite is behaving within the deeper tissue layers." Alina nodded, her mouth dry with apprehension. The fever had finally broken the previous night, but the weakness it left behind made even sitting upright a challenge. "Will it hurt?" "We'll use local anesthesia," Dr. Mitchell assured her. "But there will be some pressure, and I won't lie to you, the area is significantly inflamed, so you'll likely feel discomfort despite the anesthesia." The CDC specialist, Dr. Hammond, stepped forward with a tray of instruments that gleamed menacingly under the examination lights. "Miss Martinez, your case is helping us understand a pathogen that we rarely encounter in this region. The information we gather today could potentially help not just you, but all the others affected." Alina closed her eyes briefly, thinking of Maya Rodriguez in her pediatric bed, of the other victims whose names she'd learned through hospital gossip and news reports. "Do whatever you need to do." The initial injection of anesthetic brought tears to her eyes, but Alina bit her lip and remained still. The area around the lesion had become hypersensitive, each touch sending lightning bolts of pain radiating outward. Once the medication took effect, there was the strange, disconnected sensation of pressure without pain as Dr. Mitchell began the procedure. "I'm going to press on different areas of the lesion to assess where the infection is most concentrated," Dr. Mitchell explained, his gloved fingers gently probing the edges of the wound. "Let me know if anything feels particularly painful despite the anesthesia." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall, unwilling to watch the examination of her own ravaged flesh. She could feel the pressure as Dr. Mitchell's fingers moved methodically across her shoulder, testing, assessing. "There's significant induration here," the doctor murmured to his colleagues, pressing more firmly near the center of the main lesion. "And the tissue has an unusual consistency, almost. What happened next occurred with such suddenness that later different witnesses would recall it differently." Dr. Mitchell's fingers pressed into what appeared to be a particularly swollen area near the center of the lesion. There was a moment of resistance, and then rupture. A pocket of built-up fluid burst under the pressure, releasing a stream of yellowish discharge that contained visible specks of something solid, something moving. The collective gasp that filled the room was audible even to Alina, who broke her resolution and looked down just in time to see the horrifying spectacle of her own infection literally erupting under Dr. Mitchell's hands. "Containment measures now," Dr. Hammond barked, his professional calm shattered. "That's active parasitic material." A nurse dropped the collection tray with a clatter. Another backed away involuntarily before catching herself. Dr. Mitchell remained frozen for a split second, his eyes wide above his surgical mask, before snapping back to professional mode. "Get me the high-concentration antiparasitic solution," he ordered, pressing sterile gauze to the now weeping wound. "And prepare for immediate surgical debridement. This is no longer a sampling procedure." Alina felt strangely detached, as if watching the scene from above. What just happened? Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. The parasite has formed a concentrated pocket, essentially a protective cyst beneath the surface of your skin, Dr. Mitchell explained, his voice steady despite the urgency of his actions. When I applied pressure, it ruptured. This is actually informative, though not in the way we'd planned. The CDC specialist had recovered his composure and was now collecting samples of the expelled material with methodical precision. This confirms our suspicion that the organism establishes protected colonies within the host tissue. It explains why the systemic medications haven't been fully effective. Alina closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her that had nothing to do with the procedure, and everything to do with the realization that living organisms had been building colonies within her body. Are they still alive in there? The hesitation before Dr. Mitchell answered told Alina everything she needed to know. Yes, which is why we're going to remove the affected tissue immediately. Nurse, page Dr. Lennox in surgery. Tell him we need an operating room within the hour. The flurry of activity that followed passed in a blur for Alina. Consent forms appeared before her. Detailed explanations were given about the surgical procedure. Risks were outlined and alternatives discussed, though in reality there were no alternatives. The parasitic infection had established itself too firmly for medications alone to resolve. As they prepared to transport her to the surgical floor, a commotion in the hallway caught everyone's attention, raised voices, the sound of rapid footsteps, and then David Chen burst through the door, his face ashen and his eyes wild with an emotion Alina couldn't immediately identify. "You can't be in here," a nurse said firmly, moving to intercept him. "This is a sterile environment, and we're preparing for an emergency procedure." "I heard what happened," David said, ignoring the nurse and looking directly at Alina. "They're saying it's worse than they thought, that the infection is." He couldn't seem to finish the sentence, Doctor. Mitchell stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, you need to leave now." "It's my fault," David blurted out, his voice cracking. "All of it. The springs, the maintenance logs, everything. I knew the chemicals weren't right. I knew the filters needed replacing. But the company kept denying my requests for funds and Sophie's treatments." He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I thought I could balance it, just enough chemicals to keep it safe without the expensive parts. I was wrong, so wrong." The raw anguish in his confession silenced the room. Alina found herself oddly touched by his desperation to unburden himself, even as her body bore the evidence of his negligence. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Mitchell said, his tone gentler now, "your confession doesn't help Miss Martinez right now. What would help is if you provide the health department with complete information about exactly when and how the springs were maintained over the past 3 months. That could assist us in understanding the progression of this infection." David nodded numbly. "I brought everything. All the real logs, all the denied maintenance requests, emails from corporate telling me to make do with half the chemical supplies we needed." He held up a USB drive that Alina hadn't noticed in his hand. "It's all here. I've already given copies to the health department and the police." "The police?" Alina asked, surprised. "They're investigating potential criminal negligence," David confirmed, his expression bleak. "Not just me, the corporate management too. There's going to be a full investigation, Doctor." Hammond from the CDC stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, did you ever observe any unusual organisms in the springs? Anything visible to the naked eye?" David hesitated. "There were these small things in the filter baskets sometimes, like tiny worms, but not exactly. I thought they were just some kind of larvae from the trees around the springs. They started appearing after we switched to the new chemical supplier in July." Dr. Hammond and Dr. Mitchell exchanged significant glances. That's consistent with the life cycle of this particular parasite, Dr. Hammond confirmed. Mr. Chen, I'll need you to show me exactly where those chemicals came from and who supplied them. A nurse interrupted the exchange. Dr. Mitchell, OR3 is ready. We need to move Miss Martinez now. As they began to wheel her bed toward the door, Alina caught David's eye. Sophie, she said, her voice weak but determined. How is she doing without your insurance? Something like shame crossed David's features. Not good. Her specialists won't see her without payment up front now. We're running out of options. Alina held his gaze for a moment longer. This isn't over, Mr. Chen. Not for any of us. She wasn't sure if her words were a promise or a warning, and from David's expression, he wasn't either. The operating room was a study in controlled chaos, the methodical urgency of professionals confronting something outside their usual experience. Dr. Lennox, the surgeon, worked alongside Dr. Mitchell, removing infected tissue layer by layer while preserving as much healthy flesh as possible. The parasites had burrowed deep, establishing networks that resembled the root system of some malevolent plant beneath Alina's skin. The organisms appear to have created interconnected channels through the subcutaneous tissue, Dr. Lennox observed, his voice neutral despite the disturbing nature of his discovery. I've never seen anything like it. Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. They're establishing a protected environment for reproduction. That's why the systemic medications haven't been fully effective. The colonies create barriers that reduce drug penetration. The surgery lasted nearly 5 hours, the meticulous work of removing infected tissue while preserving nerves and blood vessels demanding extreme precision. When Alina finally awoke in the recovery room, the fog of anesthesia giving way to the sharp clarity of pain, Dr. Mitchell was sitting beside her bed, still in his surgical scrubs. Did you get it all? Alina asked, her voice a rasp. We believe so. The debridement was extensive but successful. Dr. Mitchell's exhaustion was evident in the slump of his shoulders. We've started you on a new combination of antiparasitic medications that should address any microscopic organisms we couldn't remove surgically. Alina tried to nod, but even that small movement sent spikes of pain through her shoulder and chest. And the others, Maya. Maya is scheduled for a similar procedure tomorrow, though her infection is less advanced than yours was. The other cases are responding well to treatment now that we understand what we're dealing with. Dr. Mitchell hesitated. There's something else you should know. While you were in surgery, the news broke about the Sunset Vista situation. It's becoming something of a media firestorm. Through the haze of post-surgical pain and lingering anesthesia, Alina processed this information slowly. Because of David's confession, partly, but also because one of the local reporters discovered that Sunset Vista is owned by a subsidiary of Westfield Health Partners. The name meant nothing to Alina in her current state. Should that matter to me? Westfield Health Partners also owns the insurance company that denied Sophie Chen's treatment coverage, and they own the pharmaceutical company that manufactures the diabetes supplies she needs. Dr. Mitchell's expression was grim. The corporate entity that pressured David to cut corners on spring maintenance is the same one that denied his daughter the treatment those savings were meant to fund. The cruel irony of it struck Alina like a physical blow. That's monstrous. It's business, Dr. Mitchell replied, his tone making clear what he thought of such business practices. But now it's become public, and the community is rallying. There's a protest planned outside Westfield's regional office tomorrow. Media is calling it the Sunset Vista scandal. Alina closed her eyes, too overwhelmed to process anything more. The pain medication was pulling her back toward sleep, but one thought remained clear. This had grown beyond her personal suffering, beyond even the collective experience of those infected. It had become something larger, a spotlight illuminating the dark corners of corporate negligence and healthcare inequality. As consciousness slipped away, she heard Dr. Mitchell speaking urgently to someone who had just entered the room. Something about Maya Rodriguez's condition deteriorating, about her smaller body struggling to fight the infection, about emergency measures being required. But these concerns faded into the merciful darkness of drug-induced sleep, leaving Alina temporarily sheltered from the knowledge that the worst was yet to come. News about Maya Rodriguez came to Alina not through official channels, but through the hushed conversations of nurses changing her dressings. The little girl's surgery had not gone as smoothly as Alina's. Smaller bodies have less reserve, less resilience against invasive procedures and aggressive infections. Maya had coded on the operating table, her heart stopping momentarily before the medical team could resuscitate her. Now she lay in pediatric intensive care, a ventilator breathing for her, her mother a permanent fixture at her bedside. Alina received this information in fragments, piecing together the severity of the situation through the careful omissions in Dr. Mitchell's updates and the red-rimmed eyes of the nursing staff who had grown attached to the bright-eyed fourth grader. The knowledge settled over her like a shroud, adding a weight that made her own physical pain seem almost inconsequential by comparison. "I want to see her," Alina insisted on the fourth day after her surgery, when she was finally allowed to sit up in bed without assistance. Dr. Mitchell shook his head. "You're in no condition to be moved, and the PICU has strict visitation policies, immediate family only. I'm her teacher. I'm the reason she's being treated at all," Alina's voice caught. "If I hadn't noticed her scratching, if I hadn't connected it to my own symptoms, then her condition might be even worse now," Dr. Mitchell finished firmly. "You did everything right, Alina. What's happening to Maya isn't your responsibility." But responsibility was a fluid concept Alina was learning in the interconnected ecosystem of community life. Where did one person's obligation end and another's begin? David Chen had made choices that endangered others to protect his daughter. Carmen Rodriguez had hidden her child's symptoms to protect her social integration. The Sunset Vista management had prioritized profit over safety. And somewhere in the vast corporate structure of Westfield Health Partners, executives had made decisions that valued bottom lines over human lives. Where in this web of choices and consequences did her own responsibility lie? The answer came unexpectedly, delivered by Alina Wright during an afternoon visit. The principal arrived bearing fresh flowers and grim news. "They're saying Maya might not recover fully, even if she pulls through," Alina said, arranging yellow daisies in the vase beside Alina's bed. "There's talk of neurological damage from when her heart stopped." Alina closed her eyes against sudden tears. "Has anyone told her classmates? A counselor is working with them. They're making cards." Alina's competent hands stilled on the flowers. "There's something else you should know. David Chen attempted suicide last night." The words fell into the quiet hospital room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that expanded outward. "What? How?" Alina struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the pull of stitches and bandages. "Pills. His sister found him in time and called 911. He left a note accepting full responsibility for the spring infections and saying Sophie would be better off with the life insurance money than with a father facing criminal charges." Alina's usual crisp demeanor had softened with genuine distress. "He's in the psychiatric ward now, physically stable, but..." "And Sophie, where's Sophie?" The question burst from Alina with unexpected urgency. With her aunt, I believe. Susan Chen, she teaches at the middle school. Alina studied Alina's face carefully. You're taking a remarkable interest in the family of the man whose negligence nearly killed you. Alina turned to look out the window, where summer was proceeding with indifferent beauty, the mountains rustling in a gentle breeze. What happened to me, to Maya, to all of us? It's not just about one man's mistakes. It's about a system that forced impossible choices on him. That's very enlightened of you, Alina said, a note of skepticism in her voice. Most people in your position would be out for blood. Alina thought of the parasites that had colonized her body, of the intricate networks they had built beneath her skin, of how their removal had left her permanently scarred, but alive. There's been enough blood already. That evening, against medical advice, but with the reluctant assistance of a sympathetic nurse, Alina was wheeled to the psychiatric ward. The journey through the hospital corridors was painful, each bump and turn sending jolts of agony through her still-healing surgical sight. But the compulsion to see David Chen overrode physical discomfort. He lay in a hospital bed not unlike her own, though his room had been stripped of potential hazards. No cords, no sharp objects, nothing that could be weaponized against himself. When Alina's wheelchair was pushed through the doorway, David turned his head slowly, his expression empty until recognition dawned, followed immediately by shame so acute it was almost tangible. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice hoarse. "Probably not," Alina agreed. "But I needed to ask you something that couldn't wait." The nurse who had escorted Alina positioned her wheelchair beside David's bed, then tactfully retreated to the doorway, maintaining visual contact while allowing a semblance of privacy. "How is Sophie?" Alina asked without preamble. The question seemed to catch David off guard. Of all the things he might have expected, accusations, anger, even forgiveness, concern for his daughter wasn't among them. "Not good," he answered after a moment, tears welling in his eyes. Her last round of tests showed declining blood sugar control. Without the specialized supplies, he trailed off, the implication clear. "And you thought dying would solve that." The words came out sharper than Alina had intended, fueled by an anger she hadn't realized she harbored, not at his negligence that had harmed her, but at his willingness to abandon his child. The life insurance wouldn't pay out for suicide, and you know it, Alina cut him off. "You're an environmental scientist, David. You're smarter than that." He turned his face away, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. "I don't know how to fix any of this. Maya Rodriguez might die because of me. You'll be scarred for life. Sophie's getting sicker, and now I'm facing criminal charges that could send me to prison." His voice broke. "Tell me, what would you do?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with genuine desperation. Alina considered it carefully, respecting its weight. "I'd fight," she said finally. "Not just for myself or my child, but for accountability from those truly responsible. Westfield Health Partners owns the insurance company that denied Sophie's treatment, the resort that pressured you to cut corners, and apparently half the healthcare system in this region. They created the conditions that led to all of this suffering." David turned back to face her, a flicker of something, not quite hope, but perhaps its distant relative in his eyes. "The corporate lawyers will destroy anyone who tries to fight them. Maybe, but they can't destroy all of us together." Alina leaned forward despite the pain it caused. "The community is already mobilizing. There's talk of a class action lawsuit. With your testimony about the corporate pressure to reduce maintenance costs, with the evidence of their conflicts of interest across healthcare and hospitality, you want me to testify, to go public?" Disbelief colored his voice. "After what I did, what you did was wrong," Alina acknowledged. "But what they did created the conditions that made your wrong choices seem necessary." There's enough blame here for everyone, David. The question is whether we use it to destroy each other or to create change. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Mitchell, who stood in the doorway with an expression that combined professional disapproval and personal understanding. Miss Martinez, you should not be out of bed, let alone conducting what appears to be a strategy session. Despite his words, there was a hint of admiration in his tone. I need to speak with you both, actually. There have been developments regarding Maya Rodriguez's condition. Alina's heart seemed to stutter in her chest. Is she still with us? Yes, Dr. Mitchell assured her quickly, but we've had to put her on dialysis. The parasitic infection has affected her kidneys. David made a sound like he'd been struck. Oh God, just like Sophie, Dr. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. What do you mean, just like Sophie? My daughter has a congenital kidney condition. That's why she needs the specialized treatments that our insurance, that Westfield's insurance company, refused to cover. Dr. Mitchell went very still, his clinical mind visibly making connections. Kidney involvement in parasitic infections of this type isn't common, but it can occur, especially in patients with pre-existing vulnerabilities. We've been assuming Maya's kidney failure was related to her cardiac arrest during surgery, but if there's a pattern. He left the thought unfinished, his attention turning inward in the way Alina had come to recognize as Dr. Mitchell assembling the pieces of a medical puzzle. I need to review the charts of all the affected patients immediately, the doctor said, already turning toward the door. And I need to speak with Sophie's specialists. What are you thinking? Alina asked, sensing something significant in Dr. Mitchell's sudden intensity. I'm thinking, Dr. Mitchell replied carefully, that we might be dealing with more than just a spring maintenance issue. If this particular parasite has a tropism, a preference for kidney tissue, and if the water supply itself is contaminated rather than just the springs. He shook his head. I need more data before I speculate further. As Dr. Mitchell hurried away, Alina and David exchanged a glance that contained a shared realization. The tragedy unfolding around them might be even larger and more complex than they had imagined. Ripples were still expanding, touching lives and systems in ways no one had yet fully grasped. And somewhere in Millbrook Regional Hospital, little Maya Rodriguez fought for her life. Her small body, the battleground for a conflict that had begun in corporate boardrooms and maintenance closets, in cost-benefit analyses and desperate paternal love. A conflict that would, before it ended, transform an entire community's understanding of responsibility, justice, and the true cost of looking away. 6 months after the first parasite erupted from Alina Martinez's shoulder, Millbrook had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The Blue Ridge Mountains that had witnessed her arrival in town now stood snow-capped against the December sky, their summer verdancy replaced by the stark beauty of winter. Sunset Vista Resort, once advertised as natural healing waters and mountain luxury, now stood partially vacant, its hot springs filled with concrete, and its name changed to distance it from the scandal that had made national headlines. Alina stood at the window of her classroom, watching her fourth graders bundle up for recess, their excited chatter creating puffs of condensation in the cold air. Her left shoulder, now a landscape of scars that twisted and stretched from shoulder blade to spine, ached with the approaching snow, a barometer she had never wanted but had come to accept, like so many other changes these past months. Miss Martinez, can you help with my zipper? Tommy Gonzalez called from the coat closet, struggling with his winter jacket. Alina crossed the room, kneeling carefully to assist him. Her movements were more measured now, the physical therapy having restored most, but not all, of her former mobility. The doctors had warned her that complete recovery was unlikely, Nerve damage from the extensive debridement had left her with a permanent reminder of what had grown beneath her skin. "There you go," she said, giving Tommy's shoulder a gentle pat as she finished with his zipper. "Remember to stay on the playground today. The field's too muddy." As the last child filed out with the recess monitor, Alina returned to her desk, reaching for the folder marked Water Quality Initiative. What had begun as a desperate effort to gather evidence had evolved into something more structured and powerful. A community science project that now involved 4 schools, dozens of volunteers, and a data collection protocol developed in collaboration with the CDC. The evidence they had gathered had proven devastating for Westfield Health Partners. Water samples from throughout Millbrook had revealed contamination emanating from the Chem Tech Industries facility. Not just random pollution, but specific chemical compounds used in the manufacture of diabetes medications and other pharmaceuticals. Internal documents, eventually obtained through legal discovery, confirmed that executives had known about leaking storage tanks for years, but had calculated that remediation costs outweighed potential settlement payments from any lawsuits that might arise. What they hadn't calculated was Alina Martinez, whose quiet persistence had rallied a community, and whose educational background had proven unexpectedly valuable in translating complex scientific findings into language the public could understand and act upon. A knock at her classroom door interrupted her review of the latest water testing results. Dr. James Mitchell stood in the doorway, looking different in street clothes rather than his white coat, but still carrying himself with the same purposeful energy that had guided them through the darkest days of the crisis. "I thought I might find you here on your lunch break," the doctor said, stepping into the classroom. "Old habits die hard," Alina smiled, gesturing to the chair beside her desk. "Hospitals make me restless now. I'd rather work through lunch here than spend an extra minute in the waiting room." Dr. Mitchell settled into the offered seat, his expression softening with understanding. "The follow-up scans look good. No evidence of recurrent infection or tissue abnormalities. I'd say you're officially beyond the monitoring phase." Relief washed through Alina, not for herself, as she had long since accepted her recovery as complete, but for what this represented for all the patients affected. And the others, Maya. Stable, the transplant was successful. Her body hasn't shown any signs of rejecting her mother's kidney. Dr. Mitchell's professional detachment slipped for a moment. "She'll need immunosuppressants for life, of course, but she's back in school part-time. I understand she'll be joining your class after the winter break." Alina nodded, warmth spreading through her chest at the thought. "Carmen requested it specifically. After everything we've been through together." He trailed off, the bond forged through shared trauma defying simple explanation. "And Sophie Chen?" Dr. Mitchell asked, though he surely knew the answer already, responding well to the new treatment protocol. The settlement money made it possible for them to see specialists that were out of reach before. Alina's expression clouded slightly. "David's still serving his community service hours at the water treatment plant, part of his plea deal." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Poetic justice, in a way. Man who neglected water safety, now dedicated to ensuring it. He was an environmental science major before life took a different turn," Alina reminded him. "In some ways, he's finally using the education he worked so hard for." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each reflecting on the intricate web of consequences and redemptions that had unfolded in the wake of that first itchy spot on Alina's shoulder. Outside, the children's voices rose and fell on the playground, a reminder of life continuing, evolving, healing. I've been offered a position at the CDC, Dr. Mitchell said finally, leading a new research initiative on environmental factors in parasitic disease transmission. Alina felt a pang of something like loss, though she had no claim on the doctor's presence in Millbrook. That's a remarkable opportunity. Will you take it? I'm considering it. Dr. Mitchell's gaze drifted to the classroom windows, to the town beyond. What happened here, what you helped uncover and address, it changed my perspective on community medicine. There's important work to be done in places like Millbrook, not just in research laboratories. The community would miss you, Alina said simply, knowing it was true. Dr. Mitchell had become something of a local hero, his expertise and advocacy instrumental in holding Westfield Health Partners accountable. The settlement that had ultimately been reached was historic, not just in its financial scope, which included medical trust funds for all affected individuals and comprehensive environmental remediation of the contaminated sites, but in its structural impact. Westfield had been forced to divest its overlapping interests in pharmaceuticals, insurance, and property management, a precedent that regulatory agencies were now applying to similar corporate entities nationwide. The community would miss you too if you left, Dr. Mitchell observed, turning back to Alina. I understand you've had offers as well, that environmental education nonprofit in Washington. Alina smiled, unsurprised that the doctor knew of the opportunity that had come her way after her community science initiative had gained national attention. Like you, I'm considering it. But there's something about being here, watching these children grow and thrive despite what happened. She gestured to the classroom around them, to the artwork on the walls and the science projects displayed on shelves. This is where healing happens, day by day. As if to underscore her point, the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Within moments, the classroom door burst open and children tumbled in, cheeks flushed with cold and eyes bright with the simple joy of childhood. Miss Martinez, it's snowing, announced Samantha Green, clapping her mittened hands with delight. Lena moved to the window, Dr. Mitchell joining her to watch the first flakes of winter drift down from a pearl-gray sky. They fell gently, covering the scars of excavated soil around the former resort site, transforming the mud of the playground into something clean and new. Beginnings can look like endings sometimes, Dr. Mitchell said quietly, watching the snow accumulate, but that doesn't make them any less powerful. Lena nodded, thinking of her shoulder beneath her sweater, of Maya's transplant scar, of Sophie's improving test results, of David finding purpose in protecting the community he had once endangered. She thought of corporate executives held accountable, of systems reformed, of a town that had discovered its collective voice and power. In my experience, Alina replied, turning back to her waiting students, her classroom, her chosen path. The most meaningful beginnings often start exactly that way. When life gives us scars, visible or hidden, they become the map of our journey, not just what we've endured, but what we've overcome. Alina Martinez's story reminds us that in our golden years, we aren't just survivors of our past struggles. We are the wisdom keepers who recognize patterns younger folks might miss. We understand the true cost of corporate greed because we've watched it unfold over decades. We know the value of community because we've seen neighborhoods transform through both neglect and renewal. Like Alina, many of us bear physical reminders of battles fought, replaced knees, bypass scars, medication routines that mark the hours of our days. But also like her, we've learned that healing isn't just about our own recovery. It's about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. When Alina chose to stay in Millbrook despite opportunities elsewhere, she embodied what many of us feel, that our greatest purpose comes not from escaping our challenges, but from transforming them into protection for the next generation. The greatest legacy isn't wealth or achievement, but the communities we leave stronger, safer, and more compassionate than we found them. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.